Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you all hear? Is the sound working okay? Excellent, awesome. Great, so welcome to our first author panel of this year's Welty Symposium. If you could all please take just a minute to make sure your cell phones are on silent, it'd be appreciated. And thank you for being here. I'd also like to thank the Robert M. Hearing Foundation for their sponsorship. And please note, we've also got an evaluation form in your program. Certainly filling it out after the panel or after the last session you attend, if you're planning on attending more, would be much appreciated. All right, so we've got 4 wonderful authors this morning. And for those of you who don't know the format, they'll be reading from their work. And then there should be a few minutes at the end of each reading for the author to take questions. There are some microphones set up so that we can actually hear the questions, which is excellent. And our first author this morning is Brooke Champagne, who is coming to us from the University of Alabama, where she's an assistant professor of English in the MFA Creative Writing program. She is the author of the essay collection, Nola Face, A Latina's Life in the Big Easy, which is the winner of a silver medal in Southern Nonfiction at the Independent Publisher Book Awards. As one reviewer describes it, there's so much vitality, humor, empathy, misery, and passion here. This is going to be a rich new addition to the New Orleans canon. Speaking personally, I'll say I was absolutely hooked on this book from the first chapter, which has the most dead-on description of what it's like to be a grad student comp instructor that I have ever read. By turns, very funny, harrowing, and brutally frank about exactly how bad we all were. And so I think you'll enjoy her writing as much as I have been enjoying it. Please welcome Brooke Champagne.
Hello, good morning. Oh my gosh, bright and early. Everyone's here, chipper faces. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone. I'm not going to list names right now because it's too much, but thank you to everyone involved in putting this wonderful event together. Fellow readers, Kendall, here I go naming names. It's just great to be here. So yeah, Nola Face. I think I'll just go ahead and read the thing I'm going to read. I will say that as I was talking to a fellow reader, new friend, about how to choose what to read, I don't know y'all. You know what I mean? I feel like what's the right choice? But talking to a couple lovely students last night, they were saying that my grandmother, Lala, one of the main characters in this book, she's riotous and strange. And so I felt like I needed to read a piece that includes her. By the way, is voice okay? Sound okay? Too close? I'm good? Okay. I don't know what it sounds like. I'm just like, yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so I don't think I need to set it up at all, except to tell you, Lala, yeah. This is Kingdom of Babes. My first was Smurfette. I found her lying in the middle of the polished floor of the TG&Y 5 and Dime off Michoud Boulevard in New Orleans East, where I'd begged Lala to take me to buy my very first Smurf doll. Well, doll isn't the right word. When I was 5, I called all my 2-inch plastic toys babes, same as my 5-year-old daughter calls them now. She's collected babes in the hundreds, as I once did. But as far as I know, my daughter hasn't stolen any of them. Lala grabbed Smurfette from my hand. No tiene precio, she said, citing its absent price tag. Eso quiere decir que no los dan gratis. I didn't understand, even as she went on to explain, how something could be free if stores were inherently transactional. You gave money to get something back that you want or need. Even kids knew that. Cállate, she shushed me. She set her purse down and instructed me to play with the babe directly over it and drop her in, accidentalmente. Instead, I threw Smurfette aimlessly onto the floor, sprinted down the toiletry aisle, and whisper yelled in Spanish, "Did I do it right?" Lala quickly fixed my mistake and power walked us toward freedom, there beyond the store's glass doors. She said more to herself than me. Ay, Dios mío, tengo que hacer todo. A minute later, out in the concrete heat, Lala dug through her purse to extract my prize. I held my babe close, proud of what felt like, not like a crime, but an accomplishment. Next time I said, let's take Gargamel. Hold on. Advanced age. I forgot that I can't see as well without these readers, so here we go. Over the years, Lala delighted in helping me build my kingdom of babes, whether we bought or stole them. She often reminded me what a great joy it was to spoil me, since my single mother was always off working and no good at spoiling. Lala said working as if my mother were off at the club all day. Ay, ese trabajo. The hinge on whether or not to steal was the presence or absence of a price tag. Back then, they were the half size of a postage stamp or twice the size of a hit of LSD, depending on how you look at it. They were basically stickers. They included neither scanners nor barcodes. Lala got it into her head that if there was no price tag, we couldn't technically get in trouble. She'd scour through bins of toys to find one that was limpio, or where the tag was so flimsily applied, she could use her long fingernail to blithely slide it off. If we got questioned, we could say the item was ours already. We bought it here last week, and La Nina wanted to bring her toy on our shopping trip. And how dare they accuse us of anything? That's racist. Que descaro. What if there's cameras? I once asked. I'd seen cameras capturing thieves on television, and even though those thieves were of the Hamburglar variety, wearing the I'm about to rob you uniform of black masks with eye hole cutouts, I was still worried about video evidence. Ay, que mierda. We'll say we don't know who those people are. They're not us. That Lala could be shown and denied the purest form of evidence against her and say, nope, not me, showed the genius of her madness. And that despite herself, after years of ranting about sticking it to the man and the disgracia of electing that muñeco face actor Reagan for president, Lala had truly become an American. What else has no price tags? We must have tacitly asked ourselves at some point. Grapes didn't. So we began routinely stealing those from Schwegmann's. They came in huge bins we'd bag ourselves and eat while we shopped. Then we unloaded whatever we didn't finish back into the bin before checkout. True, all true. Other fruit was up for grabs, though the gummy mess it left behind made me queasy. Once Lala ate a peach with a slow sublimity, wiping her mouth now and again with a pocket tissue, and left the pit behind some cans of tuna. In these gringo grocery stores, she also introduced me to ventriloquist eating, which was chewing while minimally moving your jaw. Que rico, verdad? She insisted it tasted better that way. We never stole anything of real value, like the 14-karat gold jewelry that had covered my body since birth. Gold rings on each hand, gold stud earrings, a nameplate gold necklace that Lala and my mother slept me in. Choking hazard be damned. Pedro Lopez, an Ecuadorian too, owned Lopez's, a jewelry shop off Veterans Boulevard in Metairie. Pedro's right eye was usually fixed through a jeweler's loop, giving him a cyclopsian look, and his fusty breath filled the whole room. It was for these reasons, and not necessarily his racism, that I disliked him. Gracias a Dios, I finally got the shop into a white neighborhood, he said on our first trip to his new location. Ironically, he and Lala talked about theft a lot, how he was armed, how he wouldn't let those coño negros in here and take his merchandise. But you said this was a white neighborhood, I thought to myself, trying to make sense of the senseless. I never understood Lala's hierarchy of racism either, which placed Ecuadorians at the very top, with Asian people several rungs lower, with the exceptions of Chinos, who she deemed dirty. Black and white people lay underneath them, interchangeable depending on her mood, and Mexicans and Guatemalans sat at the very bottom. She talked a lot about orgullo, or pride in being one of us, but I had no idea what that meant. She pointed to no particular tradition or historical event because for her it was self-evident. Maybe I didn't want to probe it further because I was half French-Italian, which translates to half white, and for Lala, most whites were caras de mierda. Does this mean I was one half fuckface? I didn't want to know. At Lopez's that day, Lala described to Pedro with gusto how thieves got what they deserved. They went straight to prison to get culo fucked, she said. which led me to speculate whether Lala understood that we stole too. I scanned Lopez's rows of lighted gold jewelry and inwardly picked out what I'd steal if I asked for Lala's permission nicely enough. Several years ago, as Lala was laid up in her Weinhoven nursing home bed and I lotioned her pale, skinny legs, I asked her if she remembered our thieving days, why we did it. "Estás loca," she replied. "Yo no fui." Lala's had this lifelong habit of denying or forgetting any memory that didn't fit into her current narrative of propriety. It's true that in her last years, dementia might have caused her to forget, but when I brought up Smurfette, how I tried to steal her so ineptly, Lala winked at me. Though when I said, "Mierda, you just winked," she denied that too. Like with so many of my Lala stories, I thought that the answer for her behavior was simple. She was loca. Or at least she wanted to be thought of as crazy because she loved the attention, because she thrived on being the woman who would do what others wouldn't. Once she exacted revenge on her unfaithful husband by shoving a hot pepper up his asshole to give one perfectly normal example. But more than wanting to be thought of as powerful, she didn't want to look weak. There's a distinction. Though we didn't discuss it, Lala was incredibly vulnerable in the world of American commerce. She never learned to speak or read English, even years after emigrating to the United States from Ecuador. But because my abuelo worked, Lala kept up their home and was expected to shop for all the things. When she wrote a check, a common form of payment in those days, she had to do it in English. So when it came time to pay, she kept a well-worn paper in the plastic covering of her checkbook with the numerals 1 through 100 written out in English. It occurs to me now, half a lifetime after our first steal, that Lala may not have wanted to ask a TGNY employee for the price, or even have me ask an employee for her. When we shopped for groceries, she added up the numbers in her head to get a close total estimate. Growing up, I was her translator, and she sometimes had fun with that. For instance, she'd suggest I tell an employee that he had a cara de verga, thus forcing me to lie in translation about what she'd actually said, which was, "You're a penis face." But it was also a sign of weakness that she couldn't do her own talking. Perhaps this was why she could steal babes from me or steal food for herself and pretend it was an accidente if she got caught. She loved lording the little power she had over others, and that often came in the form of using a language most others didn't. When I wasn't fretting over getting caught, I was concerned someone would understand Lala was talking loudly about them, since she did it constantly. Once, as we walked into a Macy's elevator going down from the 3rd floor, a woman in a pink pantsuit held the door open for us. Lala waved her hand in front of her face and said, "Uy, esa mujer hizo un pedo." She said the elevator stunk and accused the woman of having farted. "Cállate," I begged her. And then, looking straight ahead, the woman responded, "Señora, yo no fui. ¿Será que usted o su nieta pidió?" She threw the accusation right back on both of us, guessing the culprit might be Lala or me. After the woman exited the elevator, Lala called after her, "Oye, buen hecho. Good one, lady." Lala laughed about the pedo incident for the rest of the day, but I was mortified she got caught talking shit. I couldn't imagine how I'd react if we got caught stealing. The reason we eventually stopped is because I forced it. Lala was so ostentatious about everything. It seemed like she'd be happy to get caught. Maybe she yearned for the chance to haughtily deny her theft or to apologize for her mistake. "Me no speak de English." I didn't wish to translate any of these potential scenarios. It was hard enough getting caught in the elevator in Spanish. If we got caught in English, the explaining would be left to me. Lala's ethos dictated that the most important thing was to be interesting. And as I slid closer to adolescence, I desired more than anything, at least for a time, to be calm, quiet, and good. One day when Lala asked if I wanted a treat from the TGNY, I said, "I'm too big for those kind of toys now." I shuddered my kingdom of babes, and that concluded my life of stealing with Lala. My last was a couple of years ago, a box of 126 Pampers from Publix. It was an innocent enough mistake. My grocery cart was overflowing, my then toddler daughter was whining, and a portion of my $200+ spent was for a My Little Pony knockoff, one of my daughter's favorite types of babes. I need it, Mom, she said, and who was I to argue? I finally found my checkbook in the fifth zipper compartment of my hateful purse. I often get dirty looks when I use my checkbook at the grocery. The cashier has to type in a bunch of stuff into the keypad. I sometimes imagine she's typing a message to the man. Another loser customer is writing a check. And I guess I am a loser. I want to scream at the cashier and the customers in line behind me, since the reason I'm writing a check is because I don't get paid for 3 days, and I've already figured out this grocery store doesn't cash checks for 4 days. I'm an underpaid English instructor, and which means I'm always broke, but can't righteously complain about being poor, so get off my freaking back. This is why I write out the check completely before I even get in line, leaving blank the space for the total cost, exactly like Lola used to do. I can't imagine having to do this in a language I don't even understand, since even in my fluency, this simple transaction is stressful as hell. Anyway, this was my mindset when I unloaded my cart that day. Added to this, the cashier didn't know what the hell she was doing. She was the kind of cashier Lola would have loved, this Casey, as her name tag read. Lola would have said something simple and kind in English, "Hi, girl." Then in Spanish, she would have said loudly, "Mama huevo." Translated, a slightly less harsh version of cocksucker. Happened all the time. Casey was flustered from both scanning and bagging, and now she had to deal with my check. I planned to directly hand her the diaper sitting on the cart's undercarriage, but then my daughter scooted toward the red box dispenser, so I had to wrangle her back. I held my daughter under my left arm and read out the rest of the check with the right, then helped Casey load the rest of the bags into the cart. The diapers were gratis. I got a $30 discount. I wondered after I left Publix that day, and I still do, if this was Lala's rationale for stealing. She had the money to get by, but maybe not as much as she wanted. A box of Pampers means lots fewer future babes. Maybe stealing helped her save where she could, or she vaguely wanted to stick it to the man, one of the many white ones who owned stores and ran the world. Or it was her way of saying fuck you in 2 languages. Or she wanted to see what she could get away with. Or she wanted to teach me something about risk and reward and earning the things I liked. Or she just fucking did it and she liked it. As I did once upon a time. If Lala were there to witness my accidente at Publix that day, who knows? She might have insisted I return to the store and pay for it. And I would have, though I would remind her to recognize an interesting experience when she sees one, as she taught me. Once I exited the grocery and stepped into the concrete heat, I thought, next time I'll stack a large pack of wet wipes down there too. Like I tell my daughter when she makes a mistake, it's okay. Accidents happen. Thank you. We doing questions now? Is that what's happening? Hey, what you got? Scanning. Oh, yeah. Yeah, perfect. Oh, Mike. Oh, this is. Please be brave and get up to the mic. Thank you.
It works. Okay, so a lot of your poems are about growing up in New Orleans, but because we've been chatting for the past couple of days, I know you left New Orleans as an adult and you moved around, ended up elsewhere. You're in Alabama now, and I'm assuming you lived a few places in between. So when you're writing about New Orleans, do you feel like that place draws you back? Do you need to go back to that space in order to write about it, to be inside that landscape, or are you working purely from memory? So how are you admixing memory and physical space?
Oh, thank you so much for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I forget which wonderful writer. Oh, Harry Crews said this. He has a wonderful essay called "Why I Live Where I Live," which he ended up moving to Tallahassee, Florida, but he's from a really small, he wrote a wonderful memoir called Childhood, a Biography. It's a seminal, great memoir. And he had to move away from his small Georgia town because he needed that physical and psychic distance. And once he moved away, he was like, Oh, yeah, I can write about this place. I had that similar experience that while I was living in I lived in New Orleans, I lived in Baton Rouge, and it was really moving away that I was able to just understand the place better for me, like my experiences there. Really, because moving to Tuscaloosa, which was, I'm not throwing shade, please, understand that, but it is not. I don't think I need to say it. The obvious that it's not New Orleans. And, the first time I tried to like buy some wine on a Sunday, they were like, we don't do that here. And I was like, what? Like what? Or like walking around outside with a open container, which I didn't know open container was like a law. Because I grew up in New Orleans. So those kinds of things. So yes, to move away from the place help me to understand it more. Also, I am lucky though that my family still lives there, so I'm able to visit a lot. And so to be able to come back and see it in its new iterations is really, it's wonderful too. Yeah, I told my mother if she can't move. I told her she's not allowed. She was like, I want to retire in Mississippi. No. So she's still there. She's not going anywhere.
Hi,
Callie.
I'm Callie, and I'm one of the MFA grad students. I have a question tied to your writing, but also to marketing. You have,
Oh, boo.
I know,
So,
I
yes,
know.
yes. Also, yeah.
As
no,
an
it's
aspiring writer,
It's important.
this is I can read your content and I can make beautiful connections, which you do seamlessly tie in your title to your experiences being in New Orleans, New Orleanian, and that you have to have a particular space to live in this culture and this society. You also tie it into the dog who has this face that can deal with its own dog society. And
I love your description of this, by the way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
and bringing animals into a way for us to connect is special to many people, and those are things that I hear from others.
Yeah.
When that kind of connection is made. So I think that titling the book was a smart choice.
Thank
But
you.
would you mind talking with us about how you were? I thought you made it work all the way around.
Yeah.
So was it something you considered as you were writing? Did it develop over time? And what you're,
Specifically the title?
yeah,
Yeah.
how you would, I think it's nice when a title really kind of gives a description or a feel of
Yeah.
a book, and it stays with you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm never going to forget Nola face. So,
Yes.
can you tell us about your process?
Yeah, thanks so much for saying all of that. Wonderful question. I had to fight for this title a little bit, which I published with a wonderful university press, but it's a university press. So there's like less in the way of, well, in my one book experience, but it seemed, and I have lots of other friends who've also published like on this sort of independent level, that they're sort of like, they receive a book and they just want to honor most of what you have. But the title, which I came in with Nola Face, they added the subtitle, by the way. We can talk about subtitles because I have a, I don't love them, but that's just me. But I wanted Nola Face because it was something that was not in the lexicon. It just was not like I hoped that the receiving of it would be what you said, which is like, what the hell does this mean? Kind of like what Nola mean, I guess New Orleans, maybe, I don't know. And so that's why they wanted the subtitle, the Big Easy, to sort of like connect to that. Fine, it's fine. But they really wanted it to talk more about some of the larger nonfiction issues. Like several times they were pushing back, what about Two Truths and a Lie? And I was like, it took like a quick Google search to be like, there's 3 books with this title. There's like, you don't want that, you don't want that. And also like, there's something about the spirit of the city that I just really wanted to be like front facing in the title. So, and the reason that I called it that is this is like just random, but, it's not random. It's actually, it's why the book exists. I knew the book was finished after I finished writing the essay Nola Face. Like that's when I was like, I think I'd written the collection over like 7 or so years and I'd gotten a lot of them published. And then I was like, oh, this is the one where like, I don't have shit figured out, but I'm okay with not having shit figured. Like that's when I was like, there was almost, I say like, I'm not Zen at all, but like the closest version of Zen of like, oh yeah, like I realized that like Nola's messed up. I messed, like she learned it by watching me and my poor dog. Oh, God rest her soul. But so like, that was when I knew. So that essay was important. I almost read it today, but then I was like, oh, I'm also writing a new dog essay. So this is for the next book. So about how some dogs you just don't love. Do you know what I mean? I learned to love this dog. We have since adopted a dog that I'm like, I'm never going to love you. And what do we do with that? By the way, I sound like a freaking monster right now, don't I? Like goes around saying, I don't love my dog. I'm stuck with this bitch for the next 10 years. And I just have to go on not loving her anyway. So that's all of that. Some dogs aren't cool. What do you
Yeah.
do? I mean,
Yeah.
she's not cool. So yeah. Did that answer your question, Callie? Your wonderful
Yes.
question. I hope I.
Yes, and I like that that essay capped the time to publish
Yeah, yeah,
and titles your book.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. So last night over dinner, me and you had talked about how authentic I find your voice and Nola face. When the discussion of cussing and how you actually you and Lola both enjoyed stealing from grocery stores and stuff. And I had talked about that most people can admit that they have done bad actions, but they have a hard time admitting that they have bad intentions.
Can you say that last part again real quickly?
So sorry, this a little too short for this one. How most people will be able to admit that they do bad actions, but not have bad intentions. And I find that I found Nola Face overall very authentic. As someone who is new to nonfiction, what kind of advice would you give as far as craft goes to build that authenticity in nonfiction works?
Oh, thank you so much for that wonderful question, Morgan. Okay, so something I tell students is that if there's something that you're feeling ashamed about, that you feel like, I never want to push, like, if you're truly not ready to write something, like let some time go by, absolutely. But if there's something that you, like the thing that keeps you up at night, the thing that you regret, the thing that you're like, God, I really like, I can never say this because it would make me look bad. That's your subject. That and like the 19 essays in this book, like they're all shit that I regret, but like looking at things clear-eyed. So often that's sort of something that takes time. That's why when an experience first happens, I always, and that this is what unfortunately, the way I've come to look at life is like, in a way, nothing really terrible happens because it'll be material. I know I'm not wishing for bad things to happen to me. I'm not like I used, because life will bring you the bad stuff, but there's always a way to reframe into art for me. Like that's how I keep going. But I think taking notes once things happen, but having this with nonfiction, I think the space between event, you need that reflection part. So I think like always steadily working when you find subjects that you want to write about, keeping like the steady daily grind of, God, I'm sitting here in front of this computer and I am not being brilliant right now. Like that, like actually never feeling like that, but still doing it anyway. And for authenticity, I guess I spend a lot of time with Lala, who was someone who was both extremely authentic and also full of shit. I don't know how, like that is who she was. She just was sort of like, I'm this today, this new personality. And I was like, what? No, you're not. You weren't that 5 minutes ago. So I was raised with it. So I think that one of the many gifts she gave me is like a kind of bullshit detector that I cannot use just on other people, but on myself. Like I know when I'm telling a narrative that is false. And I think I've learned that through time. So I think just finding a way to be like checking yourself and not to be like, oh, I'm going to be really hard on myself just for the sake of the page, but just for the sake of like figuring it out. What is my role? Where am I complicit? When I have a essay about my sister taking on her stripper interview. And I'm like, I always thought like, I'm better than you. Like I'm better. Well, no, I'm not. We come from the same womb and like we both have our shit that we had to work out. So yeah, finding complicity and finding your role in things. Also, I mean, just other advice is just for me, something that helped was finding your people, finding your readers and reading widely, reading the things I think Marie said last night, like not just reading the voices that like speak to you that are like your voice, but the ones that are like doing some other kind of weird, crazy stuff. That all of that figures, like the more voices you get in your head, the more you know yours. I really feel that's true. It took me like 20 years to figure it out for myself, but like, better late than ever, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Savannah. I'm a MSMS student.
What's your name? Can you say?
Savannah.
Savannah. Nice to meet you.
One like important theme, huge theme I've seen transcend genre in a lot of work is innocence versus experience. And I noticed that a lot when I was reading some of your essays and also the piece that you just read. Is that like a conscious decision that you try and write about? And like, how do you feel that impacts your work?
Oh, that's so wonderful. The innocence versus experience. This is another, it really always depends on the discrete piece I'm working on. But I think when you're narrating childhood events, like I've seen writers do this. Harry Crews, who I mentioned before, one of my favorite writers, Mary Carr, who will always be tied to me because I was compared to her in a blurb. Thank you, Andre Kudrescu. So like Mary, I'm here. They do this wonderful thing often where they stick to the childhood voice for like long swaths of time and like the adult narrator doesn't come in. But then when the adult narrator comes in, that's a way to just find like making sense of the event because a child experiences something like everything. I think everything is just normal because it's happening to them because as children, we have no control. I mean, we're at the whims of other people. So I think like for this essay in particular, it was important for me to frame it in a way of like, this is the childhood me and the relationship to stealing and commerce. And how does that impact me now? And it just so happened, I knew that I had to write that essay when I truly did accidentally steal diapers and truly did not go back and pay for them because, and then I thought, that's what I thought. I was like, why didn't I? Why, like, where does this come from? And then that's when the influence of Vala came in. So I don't know if that quite gets to what you're saying, but I think it depends on the subject. And for me, when I'm writing, when there's the child me involved, there's got to be some kind of, that's like all the way on the innocent spectrum. And if you don't have that experience, if you don't have like what did all of that like mean for me, then we're just kind of stuck in that mode. And to me, that just remains always anecdotal. And you want an essay to go beyond like a story you tell in the classroom or at the bar, but a story that like has some kind of like understanding at the end and I hate that, like not a tidy bow understanding of like, oh yes, and this is the lesson I learned because I learned no lessons. Like I never learned my lesson. But just some kind of way to like encapsulate everything. And I think that's where the experience comes in. So like, I find like, I just am always bringing in the adult voice a little bit at a time to be like, yeah, what did this mean? Check, like a gut check for the reader. Like also the adults here, we're in control a little bit.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Aiden, also an MSMS student. I think tying back to the last question just a little bit, considering that you've been writing the essays for this book for so long, how over time has your perspective on it kind of changed, especially with having to do with innocence versus experience?
Great question. This is one that is like, when I read back through this, the book was just published a few months ago. And I would say that like, I am a completely different person. Again, don't learn my lesson. Same person, but like, I don't stand by like all of these like things exactly, but at some point it's Vivian Gornick has a great craft book for those of you who want to get a little bit more into writing nonfiction. It's called The Situation in the Story and sort of explaining kind of what I talked about just now, like the difference between a scenario or anecdote and what makes the story, the reason that you're telling the thing. And that was really helpful for me. But at some point, it's just about learning. This is what she mentions. It's about learning who you are on the page in that moment, within that discrete. So the you who's writing is changing. I mean, some essays, they take me like more than a year to write. Like, sorry to like, yeah, go through like 40 drafts. Like I do that. But in those drafts, I have to maintain that persona, the persona that is the lens through which I saw that experience, while the me keeps learning more, getting hopefully better. I don't know, like maybe not. But I have to stick to that persona that I've created. And it's artifice, like, it's like these are true stories, but this is black and white on the page. So like, it's maintaining, knowing who you are. She said that knowing who you are on the page in that moment, if you can do that, then the actual writer who's living and working, and breathing can change while understanding that character is like kind of set there. And you can stick with that, even though you're like, man, that person made some bad decisions, wouldn't do that again. But would do that again. I stole the damn diapers, y'all, as a 40-something-year-old woman. Anyway, it was an accident, like I said. So does that help?
Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
nice. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Tamia Jones. I'm one of the MFA students. I really loved your novel and I liked how you crafted it. So my question is about the craft. So you did 3 sections with 2 truths and a lie. So
Mhm.
now my question is the novel all a lie or half truths?
Oh, or half truths?
Yeah.
Oh, great question. Yeah. So the first 2 sections are 2 truths, a lie, and the final one is 2 lies and a truth. I think, as I was mentioning, I have a little bit of a bullshit detector because I was raised by a woman who lied constantly, but was like completely oblivious to it. Like, just wasn't aware. And then having to lie in translation, which is how I spent a lot of my childhood. I mentioned a little bit of that here. Just lying was just sort of a thing that was like self-preservation and just the way that I operated. So I've had to, like, I was saying to Morgan's question, I've had to spend like a lot of my adult life really understanding when I'm about to say something that I know is a lie, but I'm just have to do it to get out of the situation for the myriad of reasons why we do lie in life. And this book was a way for me to finally, like, and this is why I'm so grateful that I wrote it, that it's here, because I can now understand more, like when not to do that. And I don't do it on the page. So this is the best attempt at truth, the truth that it can, there's not. And I think it matters to me because I'm writing about people who a lot of them are alive. And that there's a whole ethics to that. And I don't ask them for permission, particularly if it's like, I feel like it's my story too. If I live this too, I'm not going to ask for permission, but I do want their perspective. And the truth, capital T truth, who the hell knows what that is? I'm trying to get to the closest approximation of it as possible. Because despite, I know there's like genre twisting in literature and that's super cool. But when I say that something is a memoir, I'm trying to tell you what happened for real. So this is Lala and all her craziness and me and all of mine. And yeah, so I'm trying to tell you the truth. I promise you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just intrigued by talk about, you say I never learned anything, but there's also this this healing that you see going on in your novel. And I wanted to talk about the generational trauma and systemic trauma that's being covered in your novel so definitely. And I'm not trying to out you in your.
Oh no, out away.
But how are you dealing with that? And at what level of healing are you in if you're writing stories?
Thank you so much for that. I think I like to say that I don't believe that writing is therapy, but it can be therapeutic for me. And it really is a way to, as I say in one of the essays about domestic violence, frankly, about how like it happened to my grandmother, it happened to my mother, it happened to me. Like these are things that continue, and have since had children and I don't want it to happen to them. I think that it is a way to look at everyone who's involved in these situations as not victims and villains. I think that's part of sort of like my life philosophy. And I think if you're going to write literature of any kind, you know, you have a villain character and you have, you know, the hero character, but everyone has a little bit of victimhood and villainy in them. Like this is just like the nuance of just being human, I think is really important. So I think in writing some of that stuff, like I wrote it at a time where, you know, long after these events happened. So I could really, and this is also maybe a preternatural tick of mine and how I was raised, but try to make shit funny. That's it's a way to get through the pain. It's a New Orleanian thing too, I must say, that like Katrina happens and we're like, well, liquor stores open, you know, like, let's go, you know, like, let's go do that. So just a way to get through. So but writing them, for me is, yeah, like, again, not therapy, but it helps me to create this broad, like, understanding of like, this person hurt me, they were hurt, why were they hurt? Well, how in turn do I hurt others? And why, like, again, like the complicity thing. So I think that if you have something that, again, like that was hard and it reveals like uglinesses about your past or your family, I think it's a story that is worth telling, because I mean, it's like, other people read and they're like, okay, didn't happen exactly to me this way, but also on this journey of healing from something else. And so they can, like, it will resonate with them too. So thank you, Katrina. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Claire. I'm a student from MSMS, and something I was wondering about, because I too am a writer and I'm currently working on my ability to work in prose. I primarily work in poetry, and I'm trying to work on my ability to relay stories, kind of using stream of consciousness, kind of in the form you do. And something I was wondering about is, how exactly do you confront when you don't exactly remember something? Like, I
What's
know
the last thing, how do I?
when you don't like exactly remember something, like, do you fill in with half truths? I thought it was very powerful in your one story about your Lala, when you went and got beignets, that you mentioned that gap in your memory, because it really did add to the overall, overall
Yeah.
arc of the story. But how do you fill in those gaps?
Oh, wonderful. Last question. Okay, great. Thank you. So how to fill in the memory gaps. There's, again, second time I'm mentioning Mary Carr, but she really also has a wonderful craft book, The Art of Memoir, that's also helpful with this. But I think she does the little, and many memoirists do this, the perhapsing, the maybe it happened this way. You can create a total scene and not know what the hell happened. If you just tell the reader, or like this happened often with my sister, she has her version. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna give Alexa her version a little bit. And then I'm going to tell you how I remember it. So I think it's always just about like creating some kind of contract with the reader. That's like letting them know what it is you're doing. There's also like a growing subgenre of nonfiction called speculative nonfiction, which is like completely going off into the future and like imagining futures based on like the present realities and like just creating a world out of that. So like shit that really didn't happen, but it's under the umbrella of nonfiction because we are a big tent. So I think it is always about finding some kind of way in whatever work you're doing to have that invitation to your readers and to say, this is like how I'm going to do this. So come along with me. And like, yes, in Cielito Lindo, there was definitely that sort of like, I mean, I was 4. I don't know. And also she stole me out of bed to get beignets quite often. So like, I do this in one trip, but I'm encapsulating like a lot of trips in this one trip. So yeah, I think just letting the reader, like a nice friendly handshake at the beginning. Honey, here's what I'm doing. Come along with me.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brooke. And I'd like to introduce our next author. We'll probably be taking a very short 5-minute break after her reading. And so our next writer is Hannah V. Warren. She's a former Fulbright scholar who's recently received her PhD from the University of Georgia earlier this year. So congratulations. In addition to her new book, Slaughterhouse for Old Wives' Tales, also published this year, she has published 2 chapbooks. As one reviewer writes, these poems lean deep into the estranged South with its haunted and gorgeous decompositions, folding in difficult intergenerational relationships and unburying what the earth has tucked inside itself. I have to say, I was really fascinated by all of the detail about dinosaurs in these poems, and actually the way that she was interweaving some historical documents in with the poetry. So I'd love to hear more about that. And please welcome Hannah V. Warren.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction. And I'm so glad to be here. I feel like I have been a little bit absent from the poetry community for a while because I've been traveling a lot for this book, talking to a lot of different people. I graduated from the PhD, which immediately separated me from a large part of my community. And I've been living in Birmingham for the past couple of months and haven't quite settled yet. And being here inside this space has reminded me how good it feels to be around other people who are just as excited about writing as I am. And it is truly very warm inside my heart right now. So what's delightful about following someone who is very funny, who's a reader, is that now I get to ruin all of your days. So I'm gonna read a couple of dinosaur poems from this book because you mentioned the dinosaurs. I was gonna skip them, but I'm gonna add a couple in there. And I'm going to read some poems that are very, very Southern. So I'm from Mississippi. I'm from a tiny town down in Jones County named Ellisville, which is really lovely and really beautiful. But my relationship with Mississippi was really, really strange. When I left, I never thought that I would come anywhere near here again. So after college, I moved to the Midwest. I lived in Europe for a while. I did grad school in Georgia, which is the South, but like Georgia ain't Mississippi, y'all. It's real different. And so when I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, all of a sudden I was 3 hours from home, and that's the closest I had been in a decade. And so it felt really strange. And I'm still kind of grappling with what that means for me and my poetry and my identity to just be that's close to somewhere that I've written about for so long, but in a way that I've always just like had this separation from mentally and physically. I would go back to Mississippi, of course, for holidays and things like that. My spouse is from the same hometown I am, so we're always magnetized back there. But it wasn't my place anymore. Like, I am Mississippi. It lives inside me. Jones County dirt is like clogging my arteries. But like, I didn't feel as if my identity as a current person was tied to that place anymore. And I'm realizing that that's just been a little joke. That's not true. Like, everything about me is so Mississippi. It's a little painful, but I'm like recognizing what it means to be close to this place again. So I'll read some Mississippi poems too. All right. I'm starting with Young Girls Find Familiarity in Dead Things. This museum is a Jurassic wilderness where the grisly parts are artificial craters, imitation nectar and polyp detail. You're here so often, you sometimes forget all ferns aren't machine-snipped echoes made from the same melted plastic as the moldy gumball machine at the front desk. You stare into the wide-jawed throat of Allosaurus. See how her tongue once pressed her top palate. Rapture of warm bones and acrylic polymers. Barely more than juvenile, her body is similar to yours, not quite formed, somehow unformed, in the ways that matter most to her mother. At home, you pinch your cheeks in the mirror and tuck curling hairs behind your ears. Bend a gap between your shoulder blades, render your marrow thin and supine. Imagine shaving away hair in all your hairless places. Sweat-knuckled and tense, You reach for the Allosaurus's carved snaggle teeth. This is your inheritance. If you pull hard enough, her skeleton could come apart. Synthetic medullary bone tissue seeping, your hand smoothing hard brows. You run back to your mother, waiting unhorned by the fossilized eggs. Brief thirst to touch the high glint of another's young. She searches in her little purse and asks where you left the ground beef coupon. She asks why you can't remember to do anything right. All right. So in the late 19th century, there was something that happened called the Bone Wars. So this was just like two rich dudes who wanted to out-bone each other. They wanted to find the most fossils, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get those fossils. So that included bribery, thievery, and destroying the other dude's bones. So not only are they trying to find the most, but they're like stealing stuff from their component, the other guy, right? So you would sneak into your opponent's little like dig site at night and just like crush all his bones or steal them, right? And so we lost a lot of fossils just because these two dudes were trying to outdo each other. They were trying to be the fossil guy. So the name of this poem is The Bone Wars. Now semi-arid, but once coastal plain, the land crawls with stone-washed bones, empty eye sockets and shattered femurs, bodies hunched with a constricted ancient grief, lined up like the horrific photographs you carry in your back pocket. My speaker is a paleontologist, by the way. I should clarify that. Strange maps fall from gaping rib cages and sprout new growth beneath your fingertips. You can salvage only that which has died painfully. Flash the nothing, flesh the nothing. No more than inches beneath the pallid soul. Two dinosaurs drowned, locked in each other's mouths, saliva jaws keyed together. Their teeth mostly intact, but their spines cloud brittle. You slide your finger through their joints. This fluid authority is the closest thing you've felt to baptism. You can almost taste the way they dehydrated in the sunburnt muck, dust piling sticky on their feathers. When you were young, you collected bones from dead animals. You brushed away ants and soaked the shards in rubbing alcohol until soft down or fur pulled away. You hid this nothingness, this immoral integrity from your mother, practiced pasting the white corners, jaunt angles, imagined their muscles drawing taut. Last week, your mother gripped your shoulder and said you would never be young again. Now you uncover the bones, throwing pine boughs to the side. Crawl into the hole with the skeletons. Lay the softness of your neck against terrible claw. You fissure as you rest, and you know the morning will bring nothing new. Lost blowflies swarm your hair, dim pulse crawling the lines of your ear. We love a snap. All right. So as I said, I moved back south. I moved to Georgia and I was there for about 5 years. And I was there during the pandemic, which was a strange time in general for everyone, of course. But I started thinking about how different Georgia is from Mississippi. Because when I moved back south, I was like, this is lit. The food is going to be so good. Everything's going to be incredible. Everyone's going to be nice again. And Georgia was just so different that it felt like I was in the right place. But it had this estrangement, like something was off and I couldn't figure out what. And then the pandemic happened and everything was off. So this is a collection of interconnected poems that's slapped in the middle of this book, and it's named Estranged South. Estranged South. Even the landscape is a myth. A lightning rupture recycling the dead trees. Tiny burst of red slick hollows in the stone. Tidal gray rock forming the Brooklyn Bridge and curbsides all over Georgia. Monadnock tastes foul on your tongue, like swallowing a handful of salt. You practice saying black spored quillwort, and it grows natural in your gills, replicating in your throat, until all you can pronounce is Amphianthus, a dangling Catawba worm. This hollow earth is cavernous, waiting for you to dig to the center and fill it with callous stone. A rush of mildew sours on the roundness of your heel, and you ask yourself why you've done nothing, why you've thought nothing, and you forget you are an animal and you have no thoughts at all. You dream in grayscale, shapes blurry and imprecise as charcoal smudges. You rejoin your herd, kissing their rendering portraits, vaguely familiar red rot overflowing your blunt teeth. And houses jaunt from the ground, lawns tight and stainless, absent. Neat houses lined in neat hollows, so far from summer-parched swamplands. You give up nothing for the children, little damp paste infecting your gums, fitting crooked into a right angle. Is this it? This silicone street, this ancient dialect, cornered? A roadkill armadillo lies in pieces, jaw melting into the rich soul. You plant yourself solidly, expect nothing more or less than what you've sown. Ghosts fracture from the ground to dream of buckshot and bird dogs. Dirt and reflected sunlight asphyxiating on wilted feathers. You feed your cultish sorrow to your animals, swollen and musty with age. The town chants her own name on the sidewalk, carries her own brass instrument. Oyster shells dry out in the sun, crusted with saliva and salted butter. You eat the country's carcass, sucking marrow from the bones, leaving little but fur and teeth. And you pluck the gravel from your palms and enter the town. Bees vibrate their tiny warnings and collect a crop dust of pollen from your ripe hair. All the houses here are for sale. Cubed units of elbows smashing together, and turbulent juniper trees want for nothing. You coal your tongue around a lamppost, sing wicked and slant until the world licks you clean again. Gray shutters on gray houses, gray landscapes, the other side of a camera. This home is not for the living. Elastic breath clings to a window pane where a sick girl tugs on dark curtains and kisses the cloud shapes. Silent and wine heavy in her vacant home, your mother tucks her hands into the soil, grows roots from her fingertips, and warns thunderstorms away. Authenticity is crucial. No substitutions or jello molds. No grime or anarchist. No fishing in the concrete pool filled with green algae and smallmouth bass. Your body is a continuation of another body. Although you know better, you line your womb with silver and open all 3 trillion eyes at once. And bone-dense rain falls through covered bridge rib cages. You follow the sickly floral sun, the landscape turning root cellar with shadow. How many bolts of cloth do you need to cover your body? How many signs? How many kayaks? How many dirty trinkets? How many mispronunciations? You see your future in the gold smooth water, hurricane developed hazy, the pulped rhinestones of summer nectarines. After all this, you must admit you feel temperamental. Your home is bursting with seedlings, newspaper shreds fluttering to the ground. You have ant bites in winter and splinters from the collapsed bridges you've crossed then forgotten, a county sliced from the name of a killer. A man wearing a faded black top hat stands on a corner. He pops out his glass eyeball and rolls it in his mouth before tossing it up and catching it in his empty, spit-shiny socket. He's gathered a crowd of masked domestics, all clutching their wallets tightly as they slide out $1 bills and drop them in his flourished hat. You realize this place is trying to kill you. Every courthouse brick is a memorial service, every bridge strut an irreverent gravestone. Salted blame preserves your guilt. History clogs your arteries, striking you lightning bright and deadly. You breathe it all in and nourish the aching battle in your chest. And you can't help but to consider what lives beneath the gritted surface. Cool and opaque glass shards snipping mockingbird wings. You thought you'd be anywhere but here. There is no one coming to save you. The only border between you and what's left out there is your body. All the stories got it wrong. The soft explosions and the expired squash casseroles. Metal cords choke the doorway where you once danced and touched the floor with your fingertips. Tile, asphalt rough and bitter, hips bruised and restless. If you drew a map of the town and studied it by lamplight, you'd find only the leftover blood of people who abandoned this place. You're growing sleek with scales, but you knit a history from the hollowness in your thighs, covered gaps with stolen cloth, variegated and brilliant. And you want to abandon the South, but you've dragged yourself so far into the sewers, algae blooms red beneath your fingernails. At this point, you have the face of a corpse. Chasm ripped gut deep in the stone. Fissure, blue, white, green, black. Each stone wall a granite coast. Evergreens eat the staircases you've climbed, and you lean nauseous over a railing, heightened faint, sharp smell of bent pine needles. Your voice leaks through the gulf, lichen crawling shy over your mouth. No one thinks to move to Georgia, but here was a resort town, agile as summer froth, temporary homes and stolen landscapes. You imagine no one can touch you in this place, the melt of spring high in your throat. You close your eyes and see a man crossing the gorge on a tightrope, arms distorted in the air, flayed by wind. The dead river floats softly beneath you, millions of years in the making, stoppered by gunflowers and copper pipes. And, oh, estranged South, oh, wrenched tongues, hysterical and unglued. From this abandoned mill you stretch homeward, separated in disenchanted pine forest. Viral image alone with pecan bitters, you salvage the grotesque. Abandoned town square, your wretched tongue is ripe with sun-warm honey. Oh, deviled eggs, oh, yeasted rolls, oh, local figs. This sliced apple, this skin-damp plastic pool, you prune your body in gentle wash, vinegar and water, acid and rainfall. And an empty signifier brimming with sidewalks. This place is different now. And you feel the difference, lung wide, symphonic. The town morphs before you, walls ballooning, stretched open, too much water drowning a succulent. You tuck your toes and lift them above your chest, inversion of sickly tree line. Sky dripping water in your open eyes, a poisonous film blurring the landscape. The earth has been growing for millions of years, burying and tilling cracked storms and the body's guilt, sweet sharp as citrus pills. You borrow language and use it as a band-aid. You borrow language and use it as a bandage. Bowl the rough spun sounds in your throat until nothing is left but water, absorbing so gently into the spongy clay. There's just one more in this sequence. And ash piles, an ash landscape. Skeletons grow from the newly turned soul. You measure sunburned tulips at the stems and sweep the lichen from your shoulder. The solemn dearth of gentleness tugs your earlobe. You laugh at the subtlety of touch, tonic of flint and flesh. You hum quietly in your home, lick batter from your fingertips, snip blue hydrangeas from your neighbor's yard. All the while, the town looms, a living vine in a dead garden, behind a dead house in a dead country. This town is a butcher knife with no hand to wield it. You're navigating an ocean. A wet badger snarls forward to greet you. Crusted stars form a night-shaped chrysalis. I am going to read 2 new poems that have nothing to do with Slaughterhouse for Old Wives' Tales, and then I'll call it. Southern Gothic County Dispatch. We are originals, the birthplace of fetishization, uncopied, unmediated. Eat us, and you eat the actual body of Christ. The whole body, flesh and sinew and intestines. Yes, you must consume Christ earwax, his knuckle hair, and yes, his inner thigh already marred by vampiric teeth marks. 2 little dots neatly aligned in the smallest constellation. To touch us is to touch excavation, to expose all that which you freely plunder. We are not made of decaying animal bones, or pollen, or dusty charcoal. We are not made of those tiny fish skeletons, or the finer details of auguring. We are, of course, made of holy water and the thin padding on church pews. But we will never be made of red ink, or clean air, or that ache in your femur. We are too elastic for resistance, too ripe for the plucking, too blooded, too bright and dead and polluted. Ode to all the fictional dead women named Barbara. This is the last poem. I study science fiction. That's one of the areas that I publish critically. And I think a lot about the way that science fiction has historically portrayed women as just these like empty signifiers to dump all our problems in. So this is Ode to all the fictional dead women named Barbara. Oh, faded denim. Oh, curvy timeline studded with gaps. Oh, coiffed hair and damaged ozone layer. We feel what you feel. Estranged kitten heels and popped collar. A white farmhouse with so many chipped door frames. Oh, Barbara, the dead rise from the ground and you forget your father. You think perhaps you also spooled from nothing, dust and then light, a miracle or an unnatural reconstruction. Something inside you burns just the same, nails and nails and nails. Oh, spindle nights, oh, cutthroat gunflowers, oh, cellar blooms of black mold, safe as houses, safe as all the wrecked houses. And, oh, you fainted on the couch again, Barbara. Of course you understand when your undead brother returns to consume you. Oh, teeth, oh, sour cavity, oh, flesh of my flesh. You were always meant to go this way. Thank you. Oh, Barbara, sometimes we forget your name and use these repeated sounds as a replacement. And we just can't help our memories. You've disappeared again, Barbara. Oh, Barbara, your knees creak when you stand and the damage feels like home. Thank y'all. All right, this is our Reddit Ask Me Anything time.
There's a reason I yell. It's gonna take this.
You're good. I like hanging out. I'll drink some
Okay.
water.
So I didn't realize that who you were when you were at the party last night, and I wish I had, because I have 1,000,001 questions. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book. Oh, got Katrina Canyon, MFA student. Sorry about that. But I'm going to try to stick to one question that's kind of.
I'm thrilled.
So you talk about when you talk about your mother quite a bit in this book, and I'm specifically struck with a poem you didn't read today, but the animatronic model of it has a broken metatarsal. And there are like some references that like the Dilophosaurus, where I looked that up and it's a predator. And then you were talking about yourself being in the back of its throat and like consumed by your mother. So I want to know if you could speak to like this idea that you have of femininity and your relationship and how that had to do with your relationship with your mother in writing this book.
Yeah, thank you so much. The speaker, who is definitely not me. No one could think the speaker was me. So this entire book is thinking about women's relationships inside the Deep South. And so women's relationships are so complicated. Mother-daughter relationships are so complicated, especially if you have any family trauma. I was joking with Emily Liner last night. I'm like, I'm so happy for all these people who inherited generational wealth because I just inherited like generational mental illness. It's great. So this book is an amalgamation of me thinking about all of the women's relationships in my family and how trauma passes down. So often when you're 19, 20 years old, and especially when you're younger, you don't see people's backgrounds. You don't see where people came from or maybe how their own traumas are influencing the way that they react to you. And so one of the things I was trying really hard to do is show that growth process throughout this book. So I have like a Southern ass backstory. My mother's father died in a mining accident in Kentucky. My mother's stepfather named Frank, when her mother remarried my grandmother, was like running from the law because he had a lot of gambling debts. And like back then you could just run from the law by like going to a different state. And so he like loaded my mother, her sister, and his wife into a car because those are the youngest two women in like a 9-child family. And they like drove down to Tennessee. They were in New Orleans for a while and like landed in Mississippi. And so every conversation I've ever had with my mother, like all of this background nonsense of like growing up in poverty, growing up in a very abusive family, like trickles down into the way that she reacted with me. And that's not something I understood until I got older, which like doesn't mean that abuse is okay. It doesn't mean to pass down that generational trauma is acceptable in any possible way. But it does make it more understandable. And so that's something I was trying to work through in these poems, is just the way that I saw reality as a child versus how I see reality now as an adult. And I think that's something really important that we do in our writing when we look backward, is how do we think about the thoughts we had when we were 8, 9 years old, and then layer our current understanding on top of it? How do we show that transition? How do we show that reflection? And so when I was talking to women about this book, about what I was trying to write about, I got the same story over and over and over again. Like, this is how my relationship with my mother was, and it affects the way that our relationship is now, but I'm coming to it with another layer of understanding. And so that was my goal in this book, was to signify those layers over and over again. Thank you so much. And also, I just liked all the dinosaur names. It's easier to write through somebody else's point of view instead of your own, right?
I wanted to ask you not about like your reason for writing, but like when you've been writing, do you find that it has a particular effect on you? Like it does something to you or for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think a lot about the story of like monarch butterflies and how they travel. So when monarch butterflies are in the north and they're migrating down south, for a long time, scientists didn't understand why all of a sudden they like hooked this huge right curve around this empty space. It was just a field. There's nothing there at all. But every single monarch butterfly went around that giant space and then continued flying down. After a while, we realized that that space used to be a mountain. And so there's this memory that's passing down through monarch butterflies where they're avoiding something that doesn't exist anymore. And so when I'm thinking about my writing, I am often thinking about how I avoid these things that don't affect me anymore, but used to, and the ways that like I'm still working around them. As humans, we're just little rats. We're just little rats who are like referring to stimuli out in the world and trying not to react like a cornered animal, right? And so that's often what I'm thinking about in my writing. That's why I'm writing poetry. It's trying to figure out why I'm reacting to something like a cornered rat. That was a terrible answer. I'm so sorry. Rats and monarch butterflies. Other questions, Joe?
Thanks for that wonderful reading, Hannah. That was great. It's very powerful. I was wondering, you seem to write about the body so much, and particularly bones and fossils and all of that. And it seems that you're trying to get at something that's very deep. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is something that I was talking to you're one of them, was talking to a couple of people about over the past few days. And when I was here a couple of months ago, I'm really invested in aesthetics. So aesthetics theory is the background of everything I do, but that particularly comes out in the lens of the female grotesque. So the grotesque has been around for a long time. We get that word from the Italian word grotto, which means like gross little weird cave. And so the grotesque comes out of that, like, how do we take a gross little weird cave and put it in art? And usually women are not allowed to embody the grotesque. We're not allowed to do anything gross or weird or strange. And like when we do, people are like, wow, that's so fucking weird. Why don't you just not? And so one thing I really, really love about working with bones, about working with viscera, is that it's really unexpected for women's writing, but it's getting more popular right now. And so I think working with the female grotesque, working inside the body, working with those like internal spaces that women aren't allowed to talk about. I was talking to a bunch of folks last night about just some like gross stuff that happens with women's bodies, and it's totally normal, but we don't talk about it, so it's not normalized. And so writing about the female grotesque shows that all of our bodies are doing these like strange, wild things. And so my goal is to push it 5 steps further than that norm, to do this kind of like reclamation of women's bodies, women's actions, and like women's rights to exist as human beings who have faults and joys and all kinds of other things. Thank you.
I think you may have answered some of, if not part of.
That's all right. I could ramble for longer.
Of this issue, talking about the body and bones. Let me go further.
I love it.
Because we've just talked about how feminine voices aren't allowed to have anything so-called disgusting, although they're natural functions of everybody.
And although like we've been considered contaminated since the beginning of time, right? So like women aren't allowed in public spaces when they're menstruating. That's like something that's written into biblical lore.
Right. So I want to take it a little further then and talk about how when we get into your poetry, talking about mold and decay and how you're bringing it actively into mouths. And I want to get a little deeper. I'm new to poetry, so helping to kind of understand the mechanism that you want to bring out this feminine voice and being okay to be normal, even if society calls it disgusting. But when you bring in the decaying aspects of it and you bring it into intimate spaces like the mouth or the eyes, can you talk to us about your idea there?
Yeah, so I'm working on a Sylvia Plath project right now, which has been so fun and like so disturbing in every single possible way. But Sylvia Plath, when she was alive, people would be like, that's Ted Hughes' wife. Isn't that cool? She's also a poet. And that was kind of the end. Like she had a book out there. When she published Bell Jar, everyone was just like, that's super fucked up. Like how weird. And it couldn't publish in America. And so everyone was so put off by this novel that it didn't do that well in Britain. But as soon as she died, as soon as this woman was in the ground, her writing exploded because everyone loves a dead woman. Everyone loves a tragic figure, especially when she's feminized, because she can no longer do anything wrong. And so I think about this all the time. And that's what I'm working on with my project, is thinking about like women's mental illness, how it works inside text, how women's bodies are considered to be like automated, like you input this function and she returns with this reaction. This is like the expectation. And one of the reasons like Sylvia Plath was kind of hated for a long time is because she didn't respond with that automatic function. And so when I am writing in decay to women's bodies, I'm often thinking about this particular thing, that like women are preferred dead, but only in a way that is ethereal, right? It's just like, we love a dead woman, but we don't want to see her alive or dead. We just want to imagine her when she's no longer here, because then she's perfect.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello.
I really hope you call that book Everyone Loves a Dead Woman. And I read this book as someone who is gender fluid, from a gender fluid perspective. And I don't know if it was me reading things into your work, but I saw a lot of gender transformative and protest against this idea of feminine, the feminine ideal. And can you talk about that as far as whether or not it was sort of a gender fluid novel, not novel, but collection of poetry?
Yeah, like how much time do we have?
Million and one
Absolutely. So one of my goals as a writer is to push against gender normativity. And that's often what I'm thinking about in my poetry. Because I grew up in the Deep South, as many of you know, there are social expectations for women in the Deep South. And I think it's getting a little better. You can like, y'all young people over there, getting better? Okay, that's what I expected. That's what I've heard. And so when I was growing up, I grew up as a fundamental Southern Baptist, and there were extra rules on top of the normal ones for women who were growing up inside that space. And so I am always, always, always thinking about the way that when I was sitting up in the choir, when I was sitting up in the choir, if I wore a dress that was just like right here, if I crossed my legs, I would see my mother over in the congregation, and she would hold her hands right here, and she would do this motion. Uncross and close your legs. And so things like this stick with you. My mom would ask me before church, like, do you want to just like put on a little tank top under that dress? The dress would be up to here. And so it was this continuous thought of contamination, like we were talking about earlier, like women are contaminating these social spaces. And so I didn't go into this book thinking about non-binary identity, but I did go into this book thinking about gender fluidity. So the ways that gender has been made so stark in Southern places, and how a lot of people are pushing against that. Women are pushing against that. Non-binary folks are pushing against that. Just trying to create a space in which women are allowed to exist with bodies like other people. And I think that's really difficult. And so this apocalyptic thing that's going on in this book is very gender-based, but as you keep reading, you realize it's not. But that's often what happens when like some kind of disease is happening. When COVID happened, it was automatically blamed on Asian Americans who were bringing, like, that's insane. But then Asian Americans were treated with vitriol. And so often when something happens like that, when there's this idea of contamination, we slap it on one person, one type of people. And so that's something that I'm pushing against really hard, whether that is social contamination, physical contamination, et cetera, et cetera. All they're so interwoven to me. Thank you so much.
Hi, so the one that you wrote, I can't remember the exact title, it's something with Barbara, the sci-fi one. So was that written as like kind of to go along with the other ones to capture the essence of being a woman in the South? Of like
Repeat which one it was.
the sci-fi one about
Yeah,
Barbara.
So I study horror. I study monsters. I study science fiction. This is the area of what I do. And I had this realization after a little while that especially in mid-century and late 20th century film, women had this movement of like causing further disturbance by just collapsing, which I thought was so funny and incredible. And so even in Stranger Things, there's a woman named Barbara, a teenage girl named Barbara, who just disappears. And we just like don't hear from her again. We talk about her every now and then, but Barbara's just gonzo. But I'm thinking about Night of the Living Dead, that Barbara is a woman who absolutely faints every 10 minutes to just like shove the plot forward. And so it's not that she's even a vital character. She is just there as a woman reactionary, like just there to be like, I am scared. Let me show you that this is a scary situation. You should react like I do, which is just falling on the floor. And then like continuously men are having to like move Barbara, put her on a couch, nail up a window, and Barbara's just in the way. And so I'm thinking over and over again how like men are creating these pieces of media where women are just props that you pick up and you put somewhere. And if they're inconvenient, you pick them up and you put them somewhere else. And they shove the plot forward by just being like objects, right? And we can talk about the objectification of women for like the next 800 years, but science fiction is doing something really specific with that. And even when they're pushing against it, like with Stranger Things, they fall into these tropes over and over again. And so I'm playing with this trope a lot in my writing. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, y'all.
Right, the next author we are going to be hearing from this morning is poet and musician T.J. Anderson III. He's coming to us from Roanoke, Virginia, where he's professor of English and creative writing at Hollins University. He has published 6 books of poetry and received numerous awards and fellowships, including being an Omni-Dawn Open Book Contest winner and a Fulbright recipient. His most recent collection, There It Is, was described by one reviewer as poems that tune your ears and turn them towards the new good news. I have to say my first impression of the poems from this collection were that they really demanded to be heard. I was just struck by the denseness of the wordplay and the alliteration. So I'm particularly looking forward to hearing him read them this morning. Please welcome T.J. Anderson III.
Thank you. Thank you, Nora. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here and to see everybody here and to hear Brooke and Hannah, such wonderful poetry and such wonderful space of witnessing. And thank you to the W and to the program and all of you here. I'm going to start off with a poem called What's in a Name? Begins with 3 epigraphs. In his memoir, Up from the Canebrakes, David DeWitt Turpo, my great-grandfather, writes of my Martinican ancestors dropping the X in the family name and changing it from Turpo, T-U-R-P-E-A-U-X, to Turpo, T-U-R-P-E-A-U. X denoting any unknown or unspecified variable factor, number, person, or thing. That's from the Collins English Dictionary. If a flag catch fire and an X burn in, that X, believe me, is black. Amiri Baraka. Cut cane, cut skin, cut time, cut circuitous root, cut coat, gilded man skin, cut me to the quick, and I'm an albatross skirting stormy seas. Coloratura cut to the volcanic heave of triangle trade Caribbean cut. So tell me, what's in a name? The old Shakespearean twist of fate, the tender fold of mandible enunciating the inheritance of a weighty consonant. Perhaps the Thistopussean push, reckoner of lost continents, home record to colonial pulse, from bicep curve to bipedal cargo, from hull to hull, each shining ship from sea to shining sea, from an alchemy of chains, a Calibanic braille, a limbo in the entrails of a slaver. Limbo, noun, a West Indian dance in which dancers pass while leaning backwards under a bar. Origin uncertain, but it is said to have originated after the experience of cramped condition between the slave ship decks of the Middle Passage. What then is the identifier? The irons? The premier vowel, the family legacy, the jewel, so to speak, hinged in the throat, the preamble utterance, the logos divine, brimming, the anthurium's pollinated discharge, label of owner, our ancestor, the notion, nation we live up to, what then they call you by, the adjectives that follow your back to the slack wood of a Louisiana auction block, the well-placed desk, carved out well of ink, the ledger. In the classroom, the teacher's roll call, smudged report card, summary to what you've now retained, job, stub, paycheck, 9 to 5, brutal grunt. So tell me, how does one step into that? How does one own up to a name? X, I'm my father's son, my son's flower, my follow dung. X, my mother's boy, my monsoon's boil, my muttered buoy. X, my sister's brother, my cistern's brothel. X, my cousin's cousin, my cowpen cousin. Cut! Comrade to the teeming legions of cells writhing beneath my feet. Unarticulated, this impulse to take back, to lift the ink off the manifest, new world bound. This next one is called Oble Tambu. Tambu is a kind of complex name, but it refers to a drumming pattern in 12/8 that is used in both sacred and secular ceremonies. It comes from Africa, from Angola, from West Africa, and it ends up in Curaçao in the 1600s. You can look up tambu on Wikipedia, and it talks about its use in voodoo and various spiritual kind of practices. But for me, it's a sonic link, a rhythm that kind of holds the pulse of the ancestors. And I start off with a Native American style flute a little bit to kind of open up this poem. Oble Tambu. A pileated woodpecker pecks out 16th notes on a dead poplar. Reminds me, was that one invented first flute? Rhythm as resistance, syncopated, drum way out through primordial octave. This here be wood song. This here be choppers chant. Oble tambu, oble tambu. Soon the ancient ones will arrive to take up their paces, serenade the earth with their tongue-toked language. As an initiate, I have been raised to measure the balm of seance. Oble tambu. To linger in the magic, lift flute to mouth. Oble tambu. Let wood cradle lips to let loose a fragile blow to evoke a plaintive lament under a canopy of impenetrable clouds. Oble tambu, oble tambu, oble tambu, ote tambu. In this historical horizon, I conjure shacks and shanties writhing up from salt splintered decks. My memory, a talisman that slips between corpses. No ocean in the wood, oble tambu, but a sea of timber and topsoil slipping away into the mouth of a whirlpool, oble tambu, and it's slipping away to where my anguished lament loses its potency. Unable to wrestle with the gulf of epics, my saga is simply a matter of believing beyond retrieving. See, I'm trying to initiate a poem here, but I need space. Oble tambu, oble tambu. I need room to exercise my pioneer spit and spirit. Oble tambu, oble tambu. Find a place where my witness absence spews from my mouth like an avalanche of lungs in a coal mine, like a peck of Taoist sun tied to a steel rail, like a stampede of black bodies ignited by fire and commemorative postcards. 2. A ridge of sea-washed bones cast red shadows. Jagged rib cages look like raw cathedral spires, and a tree-limbed shore turns magically into ledgers where my mother tongue vanishes. My feet tell me that this was once the place where rivers swept through, but where did they go? Too many bodies of water to recall. They lead to chains with each eddy, turbulent, unforgiving. Now the news comes in telling us it's a virus, seeding destruction in its wake. And I don't know which one they're referring to, because see, I never cottoned too much to being called an American when cross waters, smoke fires, bodies pillaged by disease. 3. While the woods may betray a calm, there's an anger deep inside me, ancient as anything I care to know. And I'm grasping for breath, and I'm grasping for words, and I'm grasping for sense, and I'm grasping for that place of solace where just that one pileated bird routinely taps for grubs on a dead limb, scalloped and pock-marked. It could be an oar to dip in the ocean. It could be a whale beneath the decks. It could be a whisper of wind through bone or the blood blue glare of a police cruiser on a rain-soaked night. It can be an abacus to record my vanishing. Thank you. Newsprint. Readings for Katrina. Words become parched, syllabic snippets to be parceled out, hung over a stutterer's tongue, meant to branch off somewhere between spoken and vernacular. The wheel that morphs its way, the facade of gentle negotiations where we mutter through. And yes, I've been misunderstood on many occasions by those who profess to have a filigree of hipness. And when the shake turns to sleight of hand and the pen levels the parchment or the boat backs up to Plymouth Rock, this knowledge that they bubble up with words or worlds of altercations, alterations, and fecal documents strained by triggers pulled so many years ago. And they even named a fancy horse after it. Rode out to sunset, city slicker style, settled for suburban borders to ensure the only thing black was what emanated from their stereos or what they smothered behind the disco light of a police's cruiser. This next one is called Pretty Boy. So I was like that whole thing that Hannah or Brooke mentioned about being the speaker of the poem. Right? This is me. This is me as a little, no doubts, this is me as a little awkward kid, buck teeth, glasses, braces, carrying my little violin to school, right? A target for, bullies, kick me, all of that stuff. But I was pretty boy. I was pretty boy. I was the anointed one held up by a line of lunch ladies who raised their industrial spatulas and soup spoons, announcing the arrival of Pretty Boy. And I sauntered in my tater-tot kingdom, repleasant khakis and school books, prince of milk cartons and tomato-crowned meatloaf, sovereign of the stainless railings we ran our trays through. I fancied myself the envy of pigtailed girls and dungaree-wearing boys. Bouffanted in polyester teachers craned for a glimpse of me. Their jeweled eye frames witness to the presence of such genius the world would call them to genuflect and all go blind. Oh, yeah, I was Pretty Boy. I was the elementary destroyer, the golden child, ignorant of the years that would eventually come to wither away my magisterial beauty. Thanks. This poem begins with a quote from the Chinese poet Tofu. It's called Seasonal, and the quote is, "Every fallen petal diminishes spring." Your accent suddenly sculpted by pedestrians abreast of you. Indeed, you are sublime, whimsical even, with your firecracker hair, your meteoric eyes, your post-colonial cheekbones, your spasm of sound erupting from your throat, your gelded walk straight out the gate. I look up from papers, across pavements blown, a nation of headlines composed. On the corner, the partisans nod, ride the urban breeze brimmed by your banter, but the boutique's display window reveals you for what you are. A Madison Avenue reflection receding, a living mannequin wreathed in pelts of 21st century materialism. I can think of no other way to say this, to insult my mammal kin, to say you are dog, or ape, or pig, is to lower their standing on the great cosmic wheel. But I was born a singer, and to pepper my narrative with images tosses this song into the marketplace. Who am I to speak, spewing my accusations to come raining down in a coinage of words? We are complicit in the joy we receive from each other's suffering. All of us at one time taking up the begging bowl. Okay. Let's see, this is one of jazz poem. I have a section. The poem, the book is divided into a couple of sections, and there's a section called Tapestry, where I particularly focus in on jazz, something I kind of grew up with and been integral into my practice and my life as an artist. This comes from actually hearing the composer, incredible genius, Cecil Taylor, pianist, playing at a concert in Cornell. And it was a full packed auditorium larger than this. And everyone was, highly anticipating, Taylor's performance. He was also trained as a dancer and studied, the music formally at Juilliard, I believe. So when the grand piano was in the corner of the room, he comes to the stage and he stalks it like it's a bison. He just doesn't like come in and sit down. And then when he hits, he's using that piano as a percussive instrument, just kind of going all over the keyboard, and it's really rhythm and energetically, it's really jarring, right? So there are people everyone's watching and so forth. and it's really powerful. And after he did this performance, it was, this kind of moment of silence, right? And I was sitting in the balcony next to this woman, and she was so fed up with it. She got up, and then she slammed the door. And because it was so silent, that slamming of the door almost connected with the performance, and it just like all the crowd was just exploded. So this is hearing Cecil Taylor. Like a piston plunging into bio depths of sunken treasures, hold of black bodies, like a hummingbird strategically perched on a cocaine's dropper, like a second shift fry cook on a 2 o'clock grill on a Saturday burn, like a hand sprinkled with your factory stench of smokestack sailors on shore ship leave, like a bold and tremolo to a flapper's piss poor smile at Funky Butt Hall, like a gory chain step, like a gory island chain step, like a city skyscraper holding up blue sky in a razor's twinkle. Still the road to revolution's evolving pageantry of ancestral breath and bone at the crossroads of Juilliard and Johnson, where the devil gives up his hold of the music. Still the road, where the scale is the song on a bison's bladder, where the scale is the song on the bison's bladder, where the alphabet is the shrapnel of consonants, a firefight piano's blur in the cockleburrs of your chest, a windpipe whole note on the cobblestones of cadenzas, like a mau, like a starlit moon orbiting the balcony, like a girl getting up, leaving her seat, slamming the theater door. Baby, don't you know you can't step out of the cosmos? Thank you. Now let me find the title. Where is it? All right, this is a kind of a weird, fragmented kind of poem, but this is the title poem from there/here it is. I kind of put that combination of there and here to being two places at one, and this idea of perception, which I'm really fascinated sonically and visually on the page. So there's a lot of kind of things popping in. So pick up what you can, drop what you can't, no worries. Somebody once told me, where there's a will, there's a way, was what he said. And I got to thinking this Shakespeare thing is going way too far. And what kind of weight was he even talking about? That's like being lassoed with the lariat of lyrics. My God, that was during the Trump years when people's shackles were up. Let me be clear, let me be Clorox, let me be celestial, let me be corpus, let me be chorus, let me be cavalier, because that's the only currency I got. See, there was something, and he got all mixed up. See, there was something there. See, there was some shenanigans, something sinister afoot, and yet, the rhythm shifts in, and the soul gets to blazing, boom, and they say, who do the saying? Something in the rhythm that morphs this phantom body into a two-step dance, the legs of Papa Legba holding his cane up for me. I pour libations for him. He greets me at the crossroads. My dance contains its own buck and wing, part goat, part eagle, with arms waving aloft. They could be appendages, they could be hard-handled knives. There is no need to offer an explanation of the folk tale about Black people flying. There is scientific proof they did. Eyewitness accounts reveal that people lifted up from the ground. One man reported seeing a yellow glow arising from the bottom of their feet. I looked up and saw one woman disappear into the clouds, he said. There is snake-hit Tucker's serpentine swirl cross supper club dance floors in the 20s. That's got to remind you of the middle, the middle, the middle, the middle, the middle, the middle, the muddle, 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 passage, passed out, passed down, passed on from one mouth to another, from palms that stun the skins, set them to singing true, seafaring, sea foraging, sea underwater as in house or body, but not articulated, complex, completed, blink, blink, dash, 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 dot, dot. At the black and white ball, Boston, 1980, Guillermo shows up wearing a tux and a life vest. Judy straddles up next to him. Who are you supposed to be? She says. I'm a man lost at sea. How can I help you? She whispers in his ear. You can't, I'm drowning, he replies. And all that reels into hauling goods, and that reels into being goods, and that reels into Hull's Caribbean bound, and that reels into hush, little baby, don't you cry. The stars fell over Alabama that night. Ever heard of the Virginia Reel? Was it last night, night before, 24 robbers at my door? No, Aladdin's 40 thieves, dank cave laden with fancy jewels, the genie at the entrance entranced. Emerald, really? Is that the Genie you dream of? She of the light brown hair? Genie, how casual and familiar you sound. The prescription is the trance. The prescription is the rhythm. The prescription is the trance. The medicine is the rhythm. The perception is the trance. The medicine is the rhythm. The trance is the medicine. The medicine is the protection that the drum calls up. It's the font. It's the front. It's the front. It's the funk. It's the fury. It's the fit. Is the flirt. Is the fet. Is the foretold. The tribal memory found. Saying, come children, don't you get weary. Let's laugh. Let's weep. Let's remember together. Thank you. So I'm happy to entertain any questions if there are. Anything?
Okay, so over the past couple of days, we've been all talking about our interests outside our writing, what else we do. And I know that you're a very devoted man of jazz. Can you talk a little bit about how jazz influences your poetry? We've all just heard you give this reading that like knocked our socks off. Your reading voice is so incredible. The way that you move with the rhythm of your poetry is so incredible. And it's like outside this world. Is that influenced by your love for music? Do you see these things combining? And can you talk about that a bit?
Oh boy, thank you, Hannah. That's a big question. I think it's all related. I consider jazz a part of I consider it a verb. I consider it a part of my life's practice. It's something I grew up. My father is a composer, 96 years old, still alive. But he started off as a jazz musician. So I grew up hearing a lot of that music. And I also heard in the poetry, Langston Hughes, The Last Poets, our fourth, and listening to that rhythm. And I think it's how do you, for me, it's like sound becomes such an integral part of my world and the way I see the world. And language is, of course, first and foremost sound. And it's like, how do I use sound and words to negotiate and to kind of understand? I think music is the universal language, right? And I always thinks that words for me is a kind of alchemy. Jazz with improvisation, it has a frame, of course, sometimes, but then it leaks to this kind of conversation with community, right? So I think jazz and poetry becomes a vehicle to negotiate and to kind of make sense and make peace with the world. If that's answering your question. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Hello. So this is a little bit building off of what she just asked, but I was wondering, a good a big part of your poetry seems to be in the performance itself. how do you tend to write your poetry so that way readers can almost recreate the experience of hearing it and experience the rhythm for themselves?
That's a really good question, right? I think for me, the idea of the poem is as a performer, as a reader, like I always think about the poem as a kind of score, right? And I bring my sense of reading to it and my sense of rhythm. But that's just my interpretation, right? And it's my hope that as a reader, like you read the poem, I hope that there's some kind of voice that you're hearing and you're kind of finding your own sense of internal rhythm, whatever that is, and you're engaging with me and we're having this kind of conversation, right? I think that music, poetry, because of its use of space and imagery is a kind of opening, is a sense of communication. Right. So my thing is like the poet, at least in my mind, my work as a poet is not kind of the penultimate view and the penultimate reading. Everything is done in collaboration. Just like my thing, I'm riffing on poets that I've heard. I'm taking from sounds that I've heard. It's all collaboration. I'm using the ancestors my ancestors that are with me, very, very much present. Right. So it's bringing in all of those things bring that as a reader to the page on the poem. And that poem is kind of a portal. It's a doorway. We have all different associations with various images and so forth. Some of us just are attuned to just the music of the words without necessarily knowing the meaning, but we kind of like that beat that's established, and that's fine. I think ultimately art is in the process of transformation, where after you read something, after you hear something, we're never the same person because our bodies are constantly changing, but we're always in this moment of change and transition.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Does that help? Yeah. How do you feel when you read the work? What's your kind of?
I tend to I kind of struggle whenever it comes to reading poetry that tends to have the performance be part of it, because I read like I'm reading an essay. So I always read things very boring. And in my own works, I try to almost give visual hints as to how you're supposed to read it, like capitalizing certain words
Oh, okay.
in order to maybe
Yes.
have people read it as accented.
Yeah. So you're putting kind of roadmaps and using the syntax. Yeah. Yeah.
But I tend other people, they tend to misinterpret it and are like, what's the capitalization here for?
Yeah. But that's okay. I think, because it opens up a kind of discussion. Yeah. But one thing I think it's really important that a lot of us has forgotten is how important it is to read poetry aloud. Right. A lot of us kind of read silently, and that's one experience, but to read it aloud or to have somebody read you a poem aloud, and that goes back to all of our ancestries, right? It was who was it who inspired the tribe to go out and hunt deer and so forth? It was the dancers, right? It was the people who painted on the cave walls, and it was the kind of the shamans and the poets and the musicians, right? That's the lineage that, as we as writers, we all come from that ancient lineage, right? And that's rooted in orality, right? Spoken word. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hey, I'm Morgan. I'm from the MFA program. And in class, Kendall had pointed out that in the table of contents, that your poem, Involuntary Stutter, is named Stutter in the table of contents, but on page 117, it's Involuntary Shudder. And I was curious if that was intentional. And if so, how you after listening to you read your poems aloud, you kind of turn stuttering into an art form, and it comes a musical aspect. And I'm wondering if stuttering is something that maybe you have dealt with in your own life and how you were able to turn that to an art form. And if it is intentional, I was wondering how it does relate to involuntary shudder.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was intentional. I think that was an accident. But But now that you mentioned it, oh yeah, I'll have to come up with a clever answer. Oh yeah. Oh yes, you know.
I'm sorry for calling you out.
No, but that idea, I think for me, the idea of stuttering, I think I use it as a kind of a rhythmic construct, and as a kind of engine. It's like trying to say the words, because I'm always, I think language is the last bastion of power, right? And I think Aimé Césaire, the incredible Martinican poet, he always talks about, he says that his job as a Caribbean, as a Martinican French writer, is to cannibalize the language, right? And in a way, I feel that the language was responsible, in a way, for me, my ancestors, my indigenous ancestors, my African, kind of losing that sense of communication, right, as English was imposed, right? So I always think, I would say scat, in a way, if I ever use scat singing or bebop sometimes with my music, but stuttering is a way of kind of breaking that down, or pausing it, or getting into a rhythm where you're stuttering and it's you're not really saying words. But with sound, you're presenting a possibility that could turn into chuck, could turn into chicken, could turn impossible things, right? So it's kind of playing with the ear. And once you get the ear listening to that cadence and so forth, then you switch it up with a word they might not expect or whatever. So I just use it as a kind of a strategy to propel the poem along. That makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything? Yes.
Hi,
Hey,
I'm Callie. I'm with the
Callie.
MFA program.
Right.
And I want to kind of go along with the student, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but talking about how to read poetry, because we just had this amazing experience with you performing it, and we can now see on the page how you've played with form to get us to perform in our own minds with those words, which is something that is hard to do. When we play with form, we're playing. And when we get feedback, there's a lot of, why did you do this, as a response to our own work? You know, if we capitalize something, we're doing it for a reason. So is that something that you have had to push through as an artist, to allow your form to speak on the page, whether, you know, an editor or someone giving you feedback has?
That's a good question. Thank you for that. I'm kind of think early on when I was writing, I was influenced a lot by kind of Dylan Thomas and Robert Frost and Robert Lowe and a lot of the kind of the confessional poets. So most of my work was really kind of narrative. You know, I was very much conscious of prosody and rhythmic, you know, iambic and rhyme and so forth. So there was a sense of craft. I always put that in quotes, a sense of craft and ornamentality in that work. And then I have an interest in the beats, right? Kerouac and Ginsberg and Black Mountain poets, Creeley and Olson, and kind of experimental poets that I started reading, and I started like translating some French, you know, things and so forth. And I think that kind of practice shook up what I thought the poem could be and spoke to me in a particular way in terms of what the line, you know, I mentioned the poem as a score, but it's also a canvas. It's also like a painting, and where you know, I would recommend Charles Olson's essay Projected Verse, written in the 50s, right? But he talks about the poem as a high energy construct, right, where it reflects the poet's breath, right? But you're thinking about the placement of the thing. You're thinking about spaces. I mean, the idea of spaces, that's a part of the poem, right? That's in kind of conversation.
Right.
And I think a lot of the practice now is, I do intuition, you know, I try to go for what instinctually I should put there, rather than thinking about some kind of reason, oh, this is here because I'm working with capitalization in this way, or I want to do that. It's like, no, this seems right. I want this emphasis here. You know, yeah, I think there's a piece by Robert Frost, I think it's called Wild Grapes or whatever, and he talks about, I had not learned to let go of the first step of knowledge. The mind is not the heart. So he was talking about the sense of, you know, the mind and the intellect kind of controlling and the artifice of that versus the emotion and the mind of the heart, right? There's a separate kind of mind. And that's what I try to step into intuitively.
Nice. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yes.
You
Trina.
sort of started talking about this, but your book, you know, when you're reading it, we're so taken in by the music and the jazz of it. But when you have the full collection, it is this complete work of art, especially when you're looking at the shape of the poems. You have kind of this flow when in the shape. But I was particularly intrigued, not in as well with the flow, but your word choices that also have that shape when you read the words. I'm thinking of There Are Rivers, and where you have it shaped as a river, but also the words that you're using a lot of S's and bringing that shape forward as well. So, and you mentioned how art inspired you, but can you go more into the art of the words on the page themselves?
Mhm.
Am I making myself clear?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think about like the shape of rivers, right? And I think about, I was telling you, you know, yesterday, the Langston Hughes's poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I'm kind of in conversation with that, right? And when I think about the sound of rivers and the idea of currents, for some reason, they evoke S words, because the S is also a shape of a kind of a curve and so forth. And I think about that idea of you never step in the same river twice, and that sense of movement and motion and so forth. So what I try to do in that poem, I think with a lot of form, is I think with this poem, I make it so it kind of slows down, right? There's use of parentheses, right? There's italics when I have these other kind of voices come in. So I make it as the, you know, rivers in terms of what rivers have represented throughout history, right? Most all civilizations have started in rivers, right? There's the Nile, Congo, the Mississippi should be sold down, all of these things, right? So it's almost, I guess I can equate it to a kind of a lullaby, right? You know, how words kind of weave in and kind of come to a point or come to a bank, if you will. Yeah. To a place of settling, to a place of settlement. That's what it is. Settlement at the end. Another S word. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, TJ. That was fantastic. And our final author this morning is Pauline Kaldas, who is also a professor of English and creative writing at Collins University. She's published 6 books, including an essay collection, short stories, poetry, a travel memoir, and most recently her novel, The Measure of Distance. She's also edited multiple anthologies and the forthcoming companion to contemporary Arab American literature. So I've really only just started reading The Measure of Distance, but I'm absolutely hooked. This is just epic, multi-generational novel about immigrants, about the family that they leave behind in Egypt, really intertwining stories. Yeah, a lot of really interesting intersections between the past and the present. And I think you will really enjoy hearing from her. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Hi, thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure to once again join this symposium. And I especially want to thank Kendall for bringing us all together. Your amazing work on this symposium is something I truly appreciate. It is my favorite reading to give of all the places I have been. I want to begin my reading by acknowledging the violence and the suffering that is taking place in Gaza and in Lebanon. And I'd like to read a short poem by the Palestinian poet Marwan Mahul. In order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I must listen to the birds. And in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent. So I'm going to read to you 4 sections from The Measure of Distance. And I have written a few books, but this is my first novel. So it was a very different kind of undertaking. It is a multi-generational immigrant novel. I started off thinking that I would be covering 2 generations. It kept growing, mostly moving into the past, and it became 4 generations. And so it begins in the late 1800s and goes all the way to the Egyptian Revolution in 2011. It sort of explores or looks at the lives of an extended Coptic Orthodox family. If you're not familiar, about 15% of the population in Egypt is Coptic Orthodox, which is the oldest Christian church. Each chapter focuses on 1 or 2 people who are immigrating, so that you begin to get a sense of the individuals as well as the larger family structure. When I write dialogue with my Egyptian characters, I hear them speaking in Arabic, and then I attempt to translate. And as I do so, I try to maintain the meaning, the syntax, and the rhythm of the Arabic language. And in this novel, I wanted to do something a little bit more than that. I really wanted some kind of visual depiction of the 2 languages on the page. So I decided that when characters would be speaking in Arabic, I would not capitalize to mark that in a visual way. And partly I did that because in the Arabic language, there are no capital letters. So it felt sort of also true to that language. Right. One of the things that started to happen as I was writing is that this became a historical novel. And I realized I love historical novels, so I guess that's why I'm now writing one. So each character's decision to immigrate is influenced by a number of different factors, but one of those factors is as sort of a historical, political event. So in a number of places, the novel sort of stops, and in a different font, you get kind of the historical event that is taking place before moving into the narrative of the characters. So in this particular scene, I begin with the 6-day 1967 war that took place between Egypt and Israel. This was a very pivotal moment in Egyptian history. I immigrated from Egypt when I was 8 years old in 1969. So the War of 1967 is probably my earliest sort of whole memory as a child. The earth seems to crackle at the beginning of that summer, an energy in the air that makes people walk a little faster, linger over their tea a little longer, and talk a little louder. Radio Cairo piles on the propaganda against Israel and anticipates its imminent defeat at the hands of the Egyptian army. Ahmed El-Said, the radio announcer on the Voice of the Arabs, predicts we're going to shove Israel into the sea. Songs by Abd al-Halim Hafiz already celebrate victory. Banners supporting the army multiply in the streets. On the morning of June 5th, 1967, the radios turn on in one home after the other, announcing the war and Egypt's triumph over the enemy. Ahmed El-Said's pronouncements of victory come on the radio, recounting the number of Israeli planes shot down. The truth is that in the first 3 hours, Israeli planes managed to destroy over half of Egypt's aircraft, as well as the runways that would have allowed them to take off. They fly in silence under the Egyptian radar, their purpose undetected until it is too late. Then they proceed to destroy the Syrian and Jordanian Air Force. The war is lost in the first 6 hours, but the truth does not emerge until 6 days later. On the morning of June 5th, Layla and Hafiz woke to the sharp ring of their phone. Layla's mother's voice screeched on the other end, "Turn on the radio, turn on the radio, al-akhbar, did you hear the news?" Layla's groggy voice answered, "What is there, ya mama?" "Harb," she said, "we entered a war," her voice lingering on the last word like an extended note. After 6 days, the sense of defeat settled on the nation like a shroud. Every step moved as if treading on quicksand. The air held still, voices sounded hollow, and the weight of loss fell heavily on each doorstep. There was no news of Hafiz's brother, Camel. Soldiers began to return, silent and stooped. Hafiz made myriad phone calls trying to gather something about his brother's whereabouts, but each phone call was passed on to another office with nothing offered. When Hafiz's sister told him that she had heard that a young man in their brother's regiment had returned home, Hafiz headed to his house without announcing his visit. Hafiz stands in front of the building, his feet cemented to the ground. He tries to resist the fear that hums through his body, the sense of certainty about what he will learn if he steps inside. But he knows, as the eldest of his siblings, it is his duty that he will have to serve as messenger. He walks in, greets the doorman with "Salamu alaikum," waits for his response of "Wa alaikum assalam," and then asks for the correct apartment. He remains focused on each step as he makes his way up the 3 flights. Already he feels lightheaded. He stops in front of the door, releases a breath and a silent prayer. He knocks twice, listens, but hears no sound emanating from the apartment. Another 2 knocks. Now he hears the shuffle of footsteps, the question of Mean. The woman who answers the door holds a dish towel in her hand. She is short with a rounded figure, and her hair is pulled into a bun, black with streaks of gray that reveal her older age. Her face is smooth, and there's a shine in her eyes that tells Hafiz he has found the right apartment. He apologizes for the intrusion, introduces himself, and explains his mission. Itfaddal, itfaddal, the woman welcomes him in, immediately understanding. Only days before, the same creases of anxiety indented her face as she waited for news of her son. She offers Hafiz a seat in the living room and says, "Just 1 minute," as she goes to another room. Hafiz hears her hushed tone as she wakes her son from his afternoon rest. Sammy, get up. There's someone here." And then the shifting of blankets and the movement of limbs muffle the rest of the words. A young man enters the room, his right arm in a sling. Hafiz can tell that he is not much older than 20, but he has the physique of someone in the military, and his face reveals an age beyond his years. Hafiz can no longer proceed with the preliminary greetings. He stands to shake the young man's hand and immediately speaks. "You were with my brother," he says. "His name is Camel Butwas." Hafiz pauses, as if saying his brother's name demanded a payment he couldn't afford to make. "We haven't heard anything of him." Once the words are released, Hafiz finds that he has run out of breath, and he sits down, feeling the words he has spoken like rocks lodged in his throat. The young man sits on the edge of the couch and shakes his head as if to wave away the question he's being asked. The word camel, meaning whole, complete, trips on his tongue. "I don't remember," the young man says. "There were many of us." Hafiz lets the silent pause sit between them. The young man's gaze reaches beyond Hafiz through the door to some other place that bears no resemblance to this living room, with the mother who stands nearby, still holding the kitchen towel. The man turns his eyes toward Hafiz. His name, he asks. Kamil Butros. This time Hafiz says it mechanically, draining all emotion from it. The young man looks toward his mother and says, "Water, your mama." She bustles to the kitchen and returns with a glass of water. She hands it to him and stands nearby as if waiting for another order. Turning to Hafiz, she says, "From the day he returned, he's always thirsty. I don't understand." The young man drinks half the glass in a single gulp and places it on the table. He takes a breath and his chest seems to settle. The sound was hard. They were shooting bullets at us constantly, and sometimes a mine would explode, but sometimes there was an explosion and we didn't know where it came from. That's what happened, and we all fell, scattered on the earth. When we rose up, we couldn't see or walk. Haram, his mother says, his arm was broken. The young man continues as if his mother has not spoken. Some couldn't rise, an arm or leg shattered, and some remained in the ground. Kamil, I looked for him. He was my friend, but it was not possible for him to get up. A few moments pass, each one a heartbeat in the silence of the room. Hafiz gets up, places his hand on the young man's shoulder, and leaves. "What do you mean we go?" Hafiz sat at the small square table in the kitchen as Layla was preparing breakfast. He looked at her as she faced the stove, stirring the bastoma into the eggs. It was Friday morning, the beginning of a day when he didn't have to go to work and when she always made his favorite breakfast. Her dark brown hair was loose, falling below her shoulders. When he had met her, her hair reached her waist, but after their marriage, she had cut it, saying she didn't want to look so young now that she was a married woman. Layla faced Hafiz, still young, but having refashioned herself as a wife. He knew how close she was to her family, how they gathered together for each occasion, and how they spoke each day. Her elder brother, Fanus, who always knew how to lighten the mood, and her younger sister, Hala, whose preoccupation with the latest fashions and trends kept them all entertained, and her parents, who had embraced him into the family, never bringing up his background, looking only at the successful man he had become. Hafiz had taken Layla's family as his own, happy to sit among them and to be owned. Now he had to offer a reason for leaving that he did not fully understand. "There are opportunities," he began. "Our lives can be better, and the country is gone." The radio played in the background, Kulthum's voice entering their kitchen with the words, "Ibka fa anta al-amal," entreating Nasser to stay, affirming hope in his leadership. As the song lingered, Hafiz refrained the words, "There is no hope." Layla turned back to the stove, stirred the eggs one more time, and placed them on a plate along with the Syrian bread and the feta cheese. She brought it over to Hafiz and sat across from him. The plate remained between them, hovering, as if waiting for its destiny to be announced. "The country is here, ya Hafiz," she said, placing her hand on his. "Your brother is gone, but we are all here, and life must keep moving." Hafiz pulled his hand away and reached for his fork, but then placed it back on the plate. "Everything is owned by the government, and only the work I do for them is acknowledged. I can't get credit for my work at the private companies. I can't even sign my own drawings. My visions are rising out of the ground, and I can't claim them." Hafiz's words whirled around them like a sandstorm. Even before they could settle, he continued, "Because I work for the government, I'm not allowed to work for anyone else. There's no possibility of advancing. The notion of socialism and equality is driving the country, and an individual's desire to rise remains curbed, held in check by government policies. The government says each man will get his turn in order. The one hired on Monday will receive his promotion before the one hired on Tuesday, regardless of who does the better job." Layla tried to avoid looking directly at Hafiz. I know, she said, but it can't be that the answer is to leave. I want the master's degree, and here it's impossible. Each year they give the scholarship to study abroad to someone else with a lower rank than me. They will never give it to someone who's a Christian. He coughed out the last words as if they had gathered phlegm in his chest. Layla looked at Hafiz, knew the weight of his words. Each year he applied for the scholarship that would allow him to go to America to complete a graduate degree in architecture, and each year he was rejected. She had seen the hardness forming in him, like a stone lodged in his shoulder. Layla recognized Hafiz's ambition, and sometimes she wondered if he chose her out of desire or because of her family status. Now even she was not enough, and his ambition stretched further than she could have predicted. Hafiz's voice broke her thoughts. If I could be successful here, I will be successful in America too. I will build a good life for us, and we can come back every year if you want. He sounded almost pleading. Layla had always imagined that her life would remain within the confines of her own country, her children growing up within the circle of their family, retracing the path of each generation before them. She faltered, I don't know you, Hafiz. America is so far away. Hafiz straightened his back. The food remained on the plate, the fork still clean. He decided to speak his thoughts aloud. I don't want to raise a son in this country. He looked directly at her, forcing her gaze to meet his. We will raise him, and then this country will take him and throw him away like they threw away my brother. Hafiz and Layla continued their daily lives, but each time they were at home together, they felt the presence of the words that had been spoken between them. Their conversation crawled into the corners of their apartment and tried to remain out of sight. The rooms grew quieter, as if preparing for the final outcome. One of the things I was interested in doing in this novel is not only exploring the lives of those who immigrate, but also going back to the lives of those who remain behind in their home country. Immigration has an impact on those who don't immigrate as they see their family members leaving. So in this next scene, it takes place during Layla's sister's wedding. Layla's sister is Hala, and it is primarily from their mother's perspective. Layla's mother, Faiza, stood in the front pew of the church, dressed in a blue gown that sparkled with its sequins. At almost 60, she was still an attractive woman and could make an impression, but her makeup was heavy that day, trying to hide the sorrow beneath her eyes at the celebration of her younger daughter's wedding. It was absence that made her tug at the handkerchief in her hand. When she asked Layla and Hafiz to come, they said they couldn't, that it was too expensive, and Hafiz couldn't leave work. Faiza followed the path set for her, from childhood to marriage to motherhood, and she has lived content with her life. That contentment was founded on the presumption that others would follow the same path, that her children would marry, and that one day she would be a grandmother, her home filled with the voices and play of the next generation, that she would see her life continue in the line of her offspring. But she has not even touched the face of her grandchildren. She only sees the grainy photographs that are sent too rarely and hears the reels of tape that arrive tainted by the recording device. Faiza plays them over and over, the voices entering her home. But instead of bringing joy, her sorrow releases as she hears the voices of grandchildren she has never known, and a daughter whose own remembrance recedes every day, until she wakes up with a start in the middle of the night, unable to recall the image of her own child's face. Now the wedding of one daughter is celebrated without the presence of the other. Only the shadow of absence stands where Layla should have been. Faiza's husband, Wasif, stood next to her, a man who was too tall for himself, who often hunched his shoulders and held his gaze perpetually downward. He inhaled his wife's sorrow, but he never had hoped that Hafiz and Layla would be here. Faiza had cajoled on the phone numerous times, and he heard her pleading voice, Just 2 days, come to the wedding and then go back. But the only response from the end of the line was, I'm sorry, Mama, over and over, like a mantra that doesn't heal, but only seeps deeper into the wound. Wasif tried to comfort his wife with the reminder of who was still present, their son, Fanous, and her nephews, Moos, Khalil, and Farid, but he knew nothing could compensate a mother for the absence of a daughter. Faiza heaved a breath through her body, and Wasif placed his arm over her shoulder, bent to her ear, and whispered, "Be happy for Hala's sake." A tiny movement of her lips responded to him, and she tucked her sorrow in as the wedding began. What Wasif didn't want to tell her was that he had seen Hala scour each of Layla's letters, reading and rereading the transparent blue paper that over the years arrived less frequently and with more English words sprinkled through the Arabic twists of sound. He saw the curtain that shadowed Hala's eyes when talk of America entered any conversation. He knew it was only a matter of time until more absence would enter their lives. So sometimes when you're writing, a character sort of intrudes in and demands some kind of space. And this is what happened with Fanous, who's Hala and Layla's brother. I had not initially really intended a place for him, but he started talking, and apparently I was expected to listen. So Fanous has a fondness for automobiles, partly inspired by King Farouk, who also loved cars and often drove only red cars. Fanous ends up saving money and buying a car at a young age. And as a result, he becomes the one who drives everyone to the airport and occasionally also picks people up from the airport. And his scenes end up between the chapters with arrivals and departures happening. So this section is called Hala and Nassim's departure, and this is when Hala, Layla's sister, and her husband end up leaving for America. Hala and Nassim's flight left at a reasonable hour in the morning, but with all the usual chaos at the airport, they still needed to get there early. When I arrived at the apartment in Zamalek, everything was in a state of disorder. Cups and glasses littered the living room table along with open bottles of wine, and in their bedroom, the suitcases lay on the bed, gaping open, waiting to be fed. Neither my sister Hala nor her husband looked like they had slept. Darkness circled their eyes, giving them a haunted look, and their movements all seemed misdirected. Hala tried to orchestrate, shouting to Nassim a list of items to pull out of drawers and closets to be folded or crumbled into the suitcases. Last night, there had been a farewell party with family and friends filling the apartment, drinking and joking with food catered from the Four Seasons Hotel. I came over for a short while, and the laughter rang to the ceiling. It didn't feel like a going away, but simply an interlude, after which we would all resume our lives. The next morning, I found Salima in her room, almost forgotten. She had dressed herself and was attempting to stuff an abacus into the suitcase on her bed. "I'm not sure that will work," I said, "but I love it and I want to take it with me. Mama said I couldn't take it, but maybe if I can find a place." I looked at the assortment of shoes and clothes folded and layered into the suitcase. Salima was 8 years old, and I knew she would quickly outgrow every one of those items. I asked her to point to her least favorite outfit, and she gestured toward a green dress with a high ruffled collar, a white wool sweater, and a pair of shiny black shoes. "I don't like these," she said. "They're itchy, and the shoes hurt my feet, but Mama says they're pretty, so we have to take them." I plucked out the 3 items. Salima nodded, and together we tucked the colorful abacus into the bottom of the suitcase. "This will be a secret between us," I said, putting my finger over my mouth. I tried to make myself useful by gathering the cups in the living room and taking them to the kitchen to wash them. I poured the remaining wine into the sink and wiped the tables. The kitchen was in upheaval, and I ended up dumping most things into the garbage. Inside the refrigerator sat the remains of food, half a chocolate cake, a platter of cheese, the fried eggplant our mother had made because it was Nassim's favorite, and other partially eaten dishes. It was too much to clean up, and I imagined how each item would mold and shrink, transforming into new substance. Hala and Nassim were in the living room weighing suitcases on a bathroom scale. They kept removing items so the luggage could reach the required weight, leaving behind an assorted pile of clothing that was likely to remain where it was for some time to come. We managed to fit everything into the car with Salima and Hala in the back seat, along with 2 suitcases. It was Friday with most people at prayer, so the roads were not as congested, and we were able to move at a good speed to make up for the time lost. Hala seemed to wake up once we were on our way. Fanus, she said, the housekeeper is coming on Tuesday next week, and we will clean up, and she will clean up and take out the garbage. She reached over to hand me a set of keys. Can you please go check after she goes and let me know if everything has been done? She spoke as if they were simply going on vacation for a few weeks, perhaps to the Mediterranean Sea in Alexandria, and would be returning to pick up their lives where they had left off. Nassim sat silently in obedience. He had lost his job, and now, without title or status, he already seemed bereft, a man with nothing to claim, nothing to ground him. I looked down at his polished Italian shoes, and wondered how long they would last in America. We believed that it was Hala who pushed Nassim to go, that she wanted a more glamorous life like the one she watched in those foreign movies and the one her sister described in her letters. For some, those films were enough to cure them of their longing, but for others, they only incited their desire. In the back seat, Salima sat quietly leaning against the window. She had been kept awake by the noise of the previous evening, and her tiredness made her small body shrink into the seat. At the airport, family and friends were waiting to say farewell. It appeared to be a continuation of the evening before, with a few jokes bantered about. When the call to board came, they said goodbye to each person with a quick hug and 2 kisses, as if we would be seeing them again in just a few days. As they made their way to the plane, those of us left behind felt the space opening to reveal the presence of absence. And this is the last section I will read. This scene takes us to the last and the 4th generation, which is right around the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. And it takes place between Farid and his son Fethi. Farid had gone to the United States in the 1960s to get a master's degree, and he made the decision to return to Egypt and turned his back on America, choosing to build his life in Egypt. Fethi, at this point, has been asked to help with planning the uprising, and he has very ambivalent feelings towards it. The scene begins with a bombing of a church in Alexandria, and this is an event that actually took place. On January 1st, 2011, a bomb explodes at the El Qadissin Church in Alexandria. It strikes the church around midnight while parishioners are celebrating the new year in worship. The explosion is set off by a suicide bomber outside the church. 21 people are killed and at least 70 injured. The crashing sound erupts in the church toward the end of the liturgy as the priest intones the final prayer. The ground shakes and pushes everyone back. There is a chaos of movement, and people struggle to leave until they find themselves outside within a crowd of wails and screams. Everyone is bewildered, as if floating above the world, the screams still sounding in their ears. That New Year's Eve, Fethi stayed alone in his Heliopolis apartment, drifting from wakefulness to sleep while the television hummed in the background. A little after midnight, the raised voices coming from the screen brought him to full waking. The erratic shouts and scrambling feet and blasting caught his attention, although the screen only showed smoke in the midst of broken pews. Early in the morning, he caught a taxi and made his way to Mohandesin. The rest of the family had spent the night at his parents' home, celebrating the new year. They woke together to find the news that had already reverberated through the Coptic community, striking new fear. It unsteadied all of them, their sense of security shattered. Fethay's mother ran to ring her sister who lived in Alexandria, and the family stood around her, holding in their breath, ready to catch her should she fall. When the ringing finally stopped and their aunt's voice entered the phone from the other end, a collective release escaped. Fethay walked away from the circle surrounding his mother's phone conversation. "This country will kill us all," he mumbled under his breath. But his father caught his words and threw them back. "These things happen in every country. Look at America, with people who shoot children in schools." Fethay turned to face his father, who was now sitting in his chair. His father's belief in his country boiled under Fethay's skin and gave rise to his voice. He knew that his father still believed Egypt was the mother of the world, El Donya, as everyone said. His father had grown up in the lap of a country infused with the cosmopolitan air of Jews, Greeks, Muslims, and Christians living alongside each other, exchanging the fruits of their labor. Fethay looked at the man who had raised him, who had outlined his life even before his birth, and released his voice. "This is not the same country that you were raised in. The government doesn't care about Copts. They will protect us from nothing. All the people in this country are hungry. Even those who have degrees are not making salaries that can satisfy their needs. No one is able to get married because they don't have the money to buy an apartment. You have an apartment. If you don't get married, maybe we should give your apartment to someone who needs it." His father's words spat out across the living room. Fethay's mother and sister stood at the kitchen doorway. His eldest sister opened her mouth, but her mother placed her hand on her shoulder to dissuade her. "There is more than one way to live in the world," Fethay said, lowering his tone. "You're a fool. When you get older, you'll understand." "Each generation is not like the last," Fethay said, releasing steam with his words. "You took your life and arranged it as you wanted. Now it's my turn. There's no choice in this world." Farid's voice released itself. "There are rules and morals to be followed." "There are no morals. Look at our leaders, each more corrupt than the other, and there is still a monarchy. Mubarak has been in power for 30 years, and his son will come after him. They're holding the country in their fist and crushing all of us. The smart ones always find a way to succeed." Fethay tried to hold the words in, but they escaped. "You succeeded through your connections. No one in this country succeeds through merit. You have to go to America for that. There is no gold on the trees in America. You stay and build your own country. Can't you see? It's already crumbling. The country was shattered in 67 and nothing has rebuilt it. We're back to tribal wars and Copts are just the easiest enemy. You lived during the times of kings and queens. You were named after the last king when everyone wanted to be like British royalty. That freedom of 52 came to nothing, and every revolution in this country will come to nothing. We eliminated the British and won our freedom. The country is ours now, and it has been for 60 years. And Fethay stopped him before he ended his sentence. 60 years, and what do we have? Poverty, overpopulation, people with degrees driving taxis, and only a few can reach the taste of meat. I gave you everything: food to fill your belly, the best education, a job, an apartment. What more do you want? The freedom to choose. I want to make something with my own hands, not be given something on a silver platter. You sit on your chair and think you rule the world, but you're not a king." Farid heaved his body forward in the chair, his arms gesturing to encircle the apartment. "I built a home and a family, and now in your hand is an apartment, a car, a job." Fethay looked at his father for a moment, a feeling of pity overcoming him. His father was in his early 70s, and for the first time, Fethay noted the age in his body, the way his back naturally curved into the position of sitting every day. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but he swallowed the words. Instead, he spewed his anger, hoping for some relief from what he had been carrying. At least in America, the poor can sometimes become rich, and honest work still has some value. At least one's future is not written at their birth. At least a human being can make something. I want to create with my own hands, to know that by my ability, I have made something in the world, not this foolery of money exchanging hands, not this waste of a job with nothing to show what I have done. I want to offer sustenance to another being, a chair to sit on, a piece of bread that nourishes. You reject everything I've given you. Emshi, go away. You don't deserve what you have. After his father spouted the words, Fethi folded into himself as if he could no longer keep his hand in his pocket, hiding what he held. I'm leaving, Fethi said, his tone flat. I won the immigration lottery. Fethi had told no one when he received the news. When he opened the letter, he saw a door opening, but it didn't seem possible he could actually walk through it. Yet he had followed instructions, filled out and submitted the necessary documentation. A few weeks ago, he had gone for the interview. He knew that his education, his knowledge of English, his social status, all of which had resulted from what his father had given him, enabled him to be accepted. He had received the final approval only a few days ago. He hesitated, unsure of what to do, balancing on the seesaw between helping to plan for the revolution and preparing his papers for departure. He had slipped the letter into his pocket, thinking perhaps that was the end of it, that he would continue as if it had not happened. But now, as he spoke the words aloud, he knew he had made his decision. For a moment, the world held still, no cars honking their horns, no court sellers shouting the value of their wares, no children in the street yelling their games. The father glared at the son, and the son kept his gaze steady. Inside the kitchen, 3 people held their breath. You've won nothing, his father said. Thank you. I'm happy to take some questions.
Hi, I was wondering how much of the story is based on your own experience as an immigrant, and then also how you were able to like fully characterize the feelings and experiences of everyone in the story.
That's a great question. Well, as I said, I did immigrate at the age of 8 with my parents in '69, and many of my family members have also immigrated. So the sense of an immigration story and an extended family immigration story is in my own experience, and I did draw on that. But I did not want to write my family story. I did want to take that leap of fiction and reimagine a new family. So there are characters that are loosely based on people that I know, or characters who combine elements of a variety of people. But this is not the story of my family's, immigration in a factual way. But it does draw on my knowledge of that experience. I've also been fortunate to have gone back to Egypt, including living there for 3 years when I taught at the American University in Cairo. And I think those 3 years also really helped me to understand the impact of immigration on my remaining family in Egypt, which is why it was so important for me to reflect that experience as well. Also in my family, you often get like a tiny bit of a story. Like my mother will say, oh, yeah, your uncle was in love, but he couldn't marry the woman he loved because the family didn't approve. And I'm like, what happened? Why didn't they approve? What was going on? And I just don't get anything else, which I find extremely frustrating. And I think this is one of the reasons I ended up writing fiction, is because I wanted the rest of the story. And the only choice I was left with is to make it up. So there are places in here too where I use these little bits of stories and in a sense sort of open them up and complete the story for myself. And I'm sorry, you had another part to your question. Yeah. It's a good question. Again, drawing on a little bit on people that I know and taking some of those qualities helps. And I think in all truthfulness, sometimes people will ask, well, which character are you? I am not a particular character in here, but there is something of me in every single character. So I do think that sometimes while we might not be giving the facts of our lives to a character, I think we can give the emotions we have experienced to the characters that we create. So maybe that is one way in which I try to make these characters real, is on a kind of an emotional level by trying to transfer some of my own emotional experiences to them. Thank you.
Hey, there's a specific character that I found incredibly intriguing in the book. Bashir, am I saying it right? Okay. I find that he is a constant in the midst of all the chaos of everybody like leaving to go to America, people coming back, and he has this repetitive part where he is either taking everybody to the airport or bringing everybody from the airport. And I'm wondering if there was a constant in your life, maybe a person, a thing, or an idea that inspired a character like Bashir, who becomes a stationary figure in the midst of all this chaos of this traveling. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Bashir is very prevalent in one of the opening chapters and one of the closing chapters. He ends up picking Salima. Salima is the 8-year-old girl who you met, who wanted to put the abacus in the suitcase. She ends up coming back to Egypt at a certain point. Bashir picks her up from the airport, and then in one of the closing chapters, he takes her back to the airport. Bashir is actually a completely fictional character. And when I started, I don't plan, I don't make outlines, I just start writing and I just see what happens. And when I started writing this, I started with Bashir as somebody who drove a taxi and sort of started imagining him in a conversation between him and Salima. And at one point, I sort of stopped and I thought, well, I'm writing a novel. I think I'm supposed to make an outline. So I tried to make an outline. And then I tried to write from that outline. And then I realized I didn't like anything I had written. And I was actually far more interested in Bashir. And I wanted to go back and find out what happens to him. So he is very much a fictional character. But somehow I don't know. He's a character I felt very close to. The one that might be a little bit more based on someone who's somewhat of a constant in some ways, but only a little bit, is Fanous. I have an uncle who, my mother's cousin actually, who remained in Egypt and does not believe in immigrating, believes it's just better to stay put. And so he has felt like a constant in my life. He is always in Egypt. Last time I went, he was there at the airport to meet me and to embrace me. So I'd say Fanous is maybe a little bit based on that uncle who feels like a very steady force to me.
Probably fitting call, so we can to wrap the question. Welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll be back at 1:30. There's lots of time in between. Lots of everyone. That's the question.